Good morning. Oh, there we go. Good morning, everyone. If I can ask you to take your seats, we are going to make a start. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You are so very, very welcome to this year's Global Irish Summit. A huge welcome to all of you for getting very caffeinated early on a Monday morning, to members of Irish government, those joining you from us from civil society, businesses, academia across the country. You're so welcome. To those of you who are experiencing something of a school reunion-like vibe here this morning, you too are very, very welcome. All of our ambassadors, consuls general, resident ambassadors and representatives from multilateral organizations, enjoy your reunion here today. To our audience online on the live stream joining us from around the world, I'm sure many of you rising very, very early in certain parts of the world. Some of you heading into evening time where you are on Ireland.ie, you are welcome. My thanks to the interpreters here on stage joining us throughout the day. And just to say at the outset here at 3 minutes past 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, I hope for you today this is going to be a moment of being further inspired into action, that you're going to feel even more informed about the ambitious strategy that lies ahead, but also that you feel connected to like-minded people, and that today is really an energy transfusion here for everyone in this room as you go about your business and recommitting to the strategy and the scale of ambition ahead. Because I'm conscious at 3 minutes past 9 ordinarily, a lot of you might be doing the first firefighting of the day. And instead, here in this room today, I hope instead you can get out of the basement, up onto your balcony, and really think about Ireland, where it stands in the world today and between now and 2040. What are the tactics and strategies, all of you as a collective, to think about? And so, with all of that, I hope as you listen to all of the conversations and keynotes and panelists here today, you can be thinking about two things, two levers. How do you go about continuing to harvest the crops already sown and go about executing to a high standard and representing Ireland on the world stage, but also with the other lever, thinking about the fields ahead yet unsown, yet to be ploughed, and making sure all the time that we are doing the futuristic mode, but being present here in the now and executing on Ireland's values. Really important that throughout the day, as you see panels up here, that you, the audience, can get involved. And you will have a QR code that you can scan that will bring you to Slido where you can ask questions of our panelists. But we will also have roving mics. So as you listen to the conversations up here on stage, please, as our audience, and to those of you online, get those questions coming in so that you are truly part of this conversation. And with all of that, we're going to tee up a video for you to kickstart the event here this morning that has been prepared by the Department of Foreign Affairs that really looks back on the progress to date under that Global Ireland strategy since 2018. And once that plays, you're going to be joined here on stage by Joe Hackett, the Secretary General of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who will introduce our Taoiseach Simon Harris, who is going to open this morning's event. And with that, let's see that video in action.
My name is Joe Hackett, and in a moment I'll have the honour of introducing our first speaker on Tánaiste. First, on behalf of everyone in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, I want to thank all of you, our partners in implementing Global Ireland, from members of the Oireachtas to other government departments to state agencies to representatives of business, civil society, cultural organisations and sporting organisations. You're all very, very welcome here today. Of course, Global Ireland is about people. It is a recognition of the simple fact that as a small country, our greatest resource, as it always has been, is our people, our human capital, in all their diversity. And together, no matter whether you're in government, whether you're represented here, or whether you're in an entirely different walk of life, everyone has a role to play in a collective effort to align our interests and our values and advance them in a complex global environment. Also, if I may acknowledge my own colleagues, having the opportunity to serve as an ambassador or consul general abroad is an enormous privilege, an enormous opportunity. But it also comes with challenges, particularly given the global context. And this week, we have all our heads of missions back for a number of days, including today. And I'd particularly like to thank and acknowledge those of my colleagues who serve directly in conflict zones, or in areas or countries directly affected by conflict. And so to Jonathan Conlon and his team in Ukraine, to Sonia McGuinness and her team in Tel Aviv, to Phelan McLaughlin and his team in Palestine, to Nuala O'Brien in Egypt, and to Marianne Bulger in Jordan, both of whom have done incredible work evacuating hundreds of people from Gaza. To our first ambassador in Tehran, Lee Shumor, and to Julian Clare, who operates in a difficult environment in Moscow, and particularly all our ambassadors and teams across Africa who work directly in the poorest countries on this planet. A huge thank you from me to all of you for the work that you do. We're fortunate in this country to have political leadership that it's global in its outlook and ambitious for this country. And so it's a great privilege and honour for me to welcome the man who was Taoiseach of this country until January of this year, who previously served as Minister for Further and Higher Education, as Minister for Justice, as Minister for Health, as Minister for Financial Services. Please welcome Simon Harris, the Tánaiste Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade and Minister for Defence.
Germagat Joe, good morning everybody, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all today, and thank you for making the time to be with us here this morning to open the 2025 Global Ireland Summit, and indeed to take the opportunity in a busy world, in the busy workplaces in which we all operate, to breathe and actually consider Ireland's place in the world. What matters to Ireland, what Ireland wants to be known for, what Ireland values, and how Ireland intends to put those values into action. I think it's fair to say, as we meet today, the world that we face in 2025 is certainly not one that we imagined 7 years ago when the Global Ireland strategy was launched. I guess in many ways it never is. Since then, the geopolitical environment has grown much more complex, much more competitive, and sadly much more fragile in many parts and places of this world. We did not know what the shape of the world in 2025 would be when we came together to design Global Ireland in 2018, but we do know now that by doubling the scope and the impact of Ireland's global footprint through a robust implementation of the strategy, that I'm proud to say Ireland on the world stage is now more adaptable to change, is more able to advance our values and our interests, and crucially, is more responsive to the needs of our citizens abroad. Since 2018, when we launched that strategy, we've dramatically expanded Ireland's diplomatic footprint with the opening of 27 missions under this Global Ireland strategy. We've deepened our resources in strategically important embassies such as Washington, D.C., London, Paris and Berlin, as well as our mission to the European Union in Brussels. During this time, I'm particularly proud to say we've significantly increased Ireland's overseas development assistance. At a time when other countries have decided to pull back, we continue to invest more in helping those most in need around the world, increasing our budget from 792 million in 2018 to 2.6 billion in 2023. We've built a network of cultural attaches, and we've demonstrated our place on the world stage by serving again as a member of the UN Security Council. So Global Ireland 2025 has facilitated very significant progress in developing a coherent, a coordinated and an impactful presentation of Ireland to the world. And this is one which I'm determined, and I know we're determined, we must now build on. We have achieved the ambitions we've set out in the strategy, but scale alone isn't enough in 2025. It's now about using our presence wisely. It's about building partnerships that are values and interest-based, future-orientated, and resilient in the face of volatility. I'm particularly delighted to welcome our ambassadors and our heads of missions here today, as well as the leaders of other government departments and state agencies. And can I too say a huge thank you to the men and women who represent Ireland abroad. I am always so proud as I travel this globe with how we are represented on the international stage. And I want to thank one other group of people as well. I want to thank your families, because I'm very, very conscious that there's an army of people who also informally work for Ireland. And many of them are married to you, or many of them are your children or your other halves or whatever else, but they also work for Ireland. And I know what great sacrifice and great disruption moving from here, there and everywhere. So I want to say thank you today to your other halves, your children, all your family for the service that you all give to Ireland. I think the term Team Ireland can sometimes be overused, but it is real. And it's about impact and it's about effectiveness. Let's be honest, we're simply too small a country to do anything other than operate with a unified approach internationally, no place for silos, and we've got to continue that approach in the time ahead. The one constant in our international approach is our commitment to core values. And I'm so pleased to hear the word values already said by Joe and Anya, and I hope this is a word, I'll come back to this in a moment, that really resonates from this hall over the course of the next few days, because this is all about our core values, and those core values underpin our national interest. Indeed, our most fundamental interest must be the protection of our values. Values that are people-focused, values that have a firm commitment to human rights and to equality, be that gender, be that race, be it sexual orientation or other areas where discrimination continues to exist. We believe in a commitment to equality of opportunity. We passionately believe in humanitarian assistance to the most disadvantaged around the world. We believe in and have a deep commitment to the United Nations, to multilateralism, to international law, and fundamentally to the pursuit of peace and security. After all, we here on this island have our own lived experience that the most intractable conflict can be resolved through painstaking commitment to negotiation, to dialogue and compromise. And of course, when it comes to our values, we have a deep and unwavering commitment to the European Union and Ireland's place at the very heart of it. We're a country that believes wholeheartedly in the commitment to the importance of open global trading systems unhindered by protectionism. Colleagues, these values will be central to the government's approach to developing a successor strategy, which we intend to call Global Ireland 2040. Usually when politicians stand at podiums, it's them who make promises to you. But today I want to ask you, if you take nothing away from this conference, to make one promise to me and one promise to Ireland, that at this difficult and challenging time in the world, that you will stand by our values. And there's a very simple values test that I'd ask you to apply in your work day in, day out. And the test is very simple. Never whisper in 2025 what you would have loudly and proudly said in 2024. Remember that, don't forget it. If you're whispering something that you would have said with pride last year, we haven't passed the values test. This is a country that believes in our engagement on the international stage being rooted not just in transaction, but in values, in mutual values, and in multilateralism. And I ask you to take away that values test and to apply it to all of your work. The new strategy that we're developing out to 2040 is going to offer us a real opportunity to reflect with ambition about how do we want to further enhance Ireland's place in the world. It's going to be central to how we use our deepened global footprint that we've worked so hard to create to promote our interests and our values, to influence international affairs, and to strengthen vital relationships with our partners worldwide. Rest assured, we'll bring a distinctly Irish lens to global issues, prioritising diplomacy, dialogue, and development. We start from a place of strength, with not only the success of the strategy we're discussing, but also the whole of government regional strategies that work very well, covering Latin America, Asia Pacific, China, US and Canada, the Middle East and Africa, also developed under that Global Ireland umbrella. We have a robust, resilient economy with full employment, notwithstanding the economic headwinds that Ireland and the world now faces. And these will be renewed and built on with an even greater Team Ireland ambition. Colleagues, the multilateral system with the UN Charter at its heart is our most important global asset. It is fundamental to Ireland's values and to Ireland's interests. Support for multilateralism has been and will remain the cornerstone of our foreign policy. This has been perhaps most clearly demonstrated in our commitment to the UN, including our proud and unrivalled record of contributing to UN peacekeeping missions. We know that it is now more important than ever because, let's be honest, today multilateralism is under ongoing, sustained and intense pressure. Under pressure from the weight of the challenges facing the global community, the weight of expectations from populations around the world seeking solutions to the scourge of conflict, hunger, climate change, inequality and a lack of development. These are challenges that no one country, big or small, can solve on its own. So we have to work together. We need strong multilateral institutions with a strong UN at its heart to meet the challenges of our century. And today, too, we live in a world where there are a record number of conflicts, more conflicts than any other time in the UN's history. And so, one thing is certain, peace is sadly becoming more fragile, and peace can never be taken for granted. One area of conflict that I've just recently returned from in the Middle East is southern Lebanon. There I saw firsthand the very reason why Ireland has the longest unbroken peacekeeping record of any country in the world. In southern Lebanon, the women and men of Óglaigh na hÉireann are not just promoters of peace, they're out there embedded in their communities, instilling our values and core belief that division achieves nothing. Our soldiers are, in the words of former US President John F. Kennedy, doing the world's most important work, and that is the work of peace. Unfortunately, though, across the world today, too often we see the principles of international law cynically undermined and ignored. This, to be honest, is depressing at times. It feeds into a sense of disillusionment about our ability and the ability of multilateralism to deliver security, prosperity, and development. And that is why it is more important than ever that countries like Ireland stand up for the values and ideals that the multilateral system embodies. It's why I'm proud that we're putting ourselves forward for membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2027 to 2029. And if elected, we here in Ireland will bring the same commitment we've always demonstrated to promoting the protection of human rights, accountability, and compliance with international law. These are values and ideals that we, the Irish people, believe can never and will never be compromised or sacrificed. Colleagues, for over 3 years, Russia has continued its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Russia's reckless actions represent a serious threat to global peace and global security. They risk emboldening other states who may decide that borders can be changed by force. It risks rewarding aggression. This has far-reaching consequences, not just for Ukraine, and I'm so delighted to see the ambassador from Ukraine here with us today, but the broader consequences for European security, for international law, and for that multilateral rules-based order that I discussed. Together with our EU partners, Ireland has been and will remain steadfast in our solidarity with Ukraine since day one of this brutal illegal war. We've committed extensive political, economic, humanitarian and military support. And we all want to see an end to this conflict, and we all want to see peace in Ukraine. But how we make peace matters. There is nobody who wants to see peace more than the people of Ukraine, and there's only one aggressor when it comes to this conflict. Only one aggressor. There's one country wanting an unconditional ceasefire to have long talks about an enduring peace, and there's another continuing to bomb civilian infrastructure, target civilians, including those on the way to church, and attack their energy networks. So let's be very clear in relation to that. Any negotiation on the future of a country has to have that country's voice heard loud and clear. Ukraine has to be centrally involved in the negotiations, as does Europe, because this is a war on the continent of Europe. We need to see a comprehensive, a just and a lasting peace, one which upholds Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, one which is based on the UN Charter, one which respects international law. There must be robust and credible security guarantees for Ukraine that contribute to deterring future Russian aggression. And one of the most important long-term security guarantees that any of us can offer Ukraine is membership of the European Union. It's time to bring Ukraine into the European family where it belongs. Ireland has always been a strong supporter of enlargement, and we will continue to strongly advocate for Ukraine on its EU accession path. We do so because the Ukrainian people have made clear their European choice, and the Ukrainian government has, remarkably, despite the ongoing war, demonstrated its commitment and progress in terms of the reform process. They've made clear their desire for a European future. They've shown they're prepared to fight for this with their lives. We in Europe must open our arms and support them on that journey into the European Union. Colleagues, the global security environment has become more contested, more complex, more interconnected. We all know that. We see it clearly with Russia's illegal war. We also see it in the increase in scale and recklessness of Russia's campaign of hybrid activity. I want to be very clear about Ireland's military neutrality because it often gets misrepresented and often people make ill-informed comments in relation to it. Our policy of military neutrality, which we're proud of and which will continue, does not provide us with some magic shield. It doesn't inherently insulate us from the impacts of a rapidly changing and volatile international security environment. We've always taken an active approach to global challenges in this country. We've always made significant contributions to international peace. And we recognise very clearly the need to strengthen our defence capabilities in light of the changed geopolitical landscape. I want you to know that significant work is ongoing, and we intend to continue to lead this effort over the term of this government. Being neutral does not mean shirking our responsibilities, keeping the head down, hiding in the shadows and hoping for the best. Yes, we will continue to be militarily unaligned, but that does not mean and will not mean that we don't invest properly in our defence capabilities, in knowing what happens above our skies, below our seas, and being able to keep our people safe. I need to turn my attention to the conflict in the Middle East. This remains a priority for all of us in Ireland and for the Irish government. And to be honest, there's times when you struggle to find diplomatic words. You cannot but be deeply appalled and sickened by the continuing blockade of humanitarian aid entering Gaza. Children are starving. Basic pain-killing medication cannot be accessed. Hospitals are being bombed. And the scale of death and destruction in Gaza is almost unimaginable and is certainly unconscionable. We now have reports from the World Food Programme that food supplies are running out. Famine is a real risk for many Gazans, and children are even dying as we speak this morning. Now, we cannot and we will not stand idly by and let this happen. When people look back at this moment in history, they're going to look back and they're going to say the world did not do enough. Be clear about that. The world is not doing enough. The failure to move to phase 2 of the ceasefire, the failure to move forward with the hostage release deal, has been devastating for the families involved, for the families desperately wanting their loved ones released and back with them, and for ordinary Palestinians in Gaza. So today, I again call, and we must all call, for an immediate cessation of hostilities, for the release of all remaining hostages, and for the immediate resumption of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza. We reiterate our condemnation of Hamas. Hamas offer the people of Gaza no future, no prospect of a bright, stable future. It's an illegal terrorist organisation. We know that. But we also know that the only way to provide peace and security for Israel and Palestine is a two-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians can live in safety and security side by side. That's where we need to get to. And Israel has to comply with its obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. What we have heard in the last number of hours is utterly alarming. The idea that at a time when most of the world are calling for a cessation of violence, that the Israeli government would decide to expand its military operations in Gaza is extraordinarily worrying, alarming, and will no doubt result in further loss of life, further catastrophe, and a further step away from the peace that we all desperately need to see. Humanitarian agencies, including UNRWA, must be allowed to operate fully. You can't privatise out humanitarian assistance to a military army. And we have to resist challenges to UNRWA's mandate that threaten the very integrity of the international system. In the West Bank, settlement activity is rising, and Israel is now conducting its single largest military operation in 20 years, and it's resulted in the displacement of at least 40,000 people. Ireland's position, again, often gets misrepresented in relation to this conflict, so let me be very clear for those who wish to misrepresent it or those who accidentally misrepresent it. Our values come into this as well. We believe in international law. We believe in a two-state solution. We believe in human rights, and we don't believe any country has any right to breach international law. We remain convinced that the implementation of the two-state solution is the only way to establish lasting peace and security, and we have to get back to a political pathway. So much work has been done to have a plan for the future of Gaza. So much inspiring work has been done by the Arab states that the EU stands ready to help with and engage with. But first, we need the violence to stop. I condemn the Houthi missile attack on Israel at the weekend. The Houthis have brought only suffering to the people of Yemen and the region. I welcome the recent start of talks between Iran and the US on Iran's nuclear program. A negotiated solution would be an important contribution to regional peace and security. But we cannot stay silent in relation to what's happening to innocent civilians in Gaza today. At a time when the rules-based international order is under pressure, it's now more important than ever that the European Union stands united, and Ireland will be a driver of ambition in this regard. We're excited and looking forward to taking on the presidency of the Council of the European Union for the 8th time in the second half of next year. It's going to be an important opportunity for us to lead, for us to shape the agenda of our ever-evolving union. Our programme for government underlines the preparation and delivery of a successful presidency and what's going to be required to make that happen, including a huge amount of work across so many government departments in the months ahead. Doing the job well will ensure that Ireland's position, influence and reputation in the EU is maintained and enhanced. We'll have a challenging task as we work to advance the Union's agenda against that complex geopolitical background I've referenced. Our presidency objectively will come at a crucial time for the EU. We face a less predictable international environment. Our agenda will be a full one. Our agenda will be a demanding one. And we will focus on those areas where we can make the most effective contribution and where we can best advance a positive policy agenda for the Union and for citizens across the EU. Ireland has 7 successful presidencies under our belt, and I know, and no pressure to those of you in the room involved, we're all in this together, I know that in 2026 we're going to deliver another successful one too. The EU strategic agenda, covering the 5 years from 2024 out to 2029, sets out the political direction, sets out the overarching priorities to guide the work of the EU during this period. And the text focuses on 3 key areas: a free and democratic Europe, a strong and secure Europe, and a prosperous and competitive Europe. Since the previous agenda was agreed in 2019, Europe has faced so many crises and uncertainties: the COVID-19 pandemic, war in Europe, populist electoral upheavals, ongoing economic shifts, and the ongoing climate crisis. We're living in turbulent times, and more than ever, we need to work together across Europe to protect and defend our interests and our values. We need to prepare our union to receive new member states. We need to work to strengthen the rule of law mechanisms, and we need to continue to champion the rules-based international order. I welcome the strong reaffirmation of these values in the new strategic agenda, as well as the commitment to the continued implementation of the climate transitions and digital transitions. I particularly welcome the emphasis in the agenda on deepening the single market, the recognition that it represents our greatest assets. We often talk about diversifying into new markets. That's so important. But actually, the greatest room for expansion is within our own single market and completing that journey too. It's key to our continued prosperity, particularly in the current context of global trade challenges. And on that issue, let's reflect on this. Ireland's story has always been one of openness. Openness to the world, openness to trade, openness to new ideas, and openness to partnership. Our prosperity is enhanced by our ability to produce high-quality goods and services and bring them to global markets. The Irish economy performed strongly last year, reflecting ongoing gains in the labour market, significant easing in inflation, and this helped solid growth in the domestic economy. But the economic backdrop has become much more uncertain. The most pressing risks are now external in nature, and they include risks related to increased trade protectionism and weaker than expected demand in our main trading partners. This has been a tumultuous period for those engaged in international trade arising from the actions of the US administration. Last October, I had the opportunity to be in DC to mark 100 years of diplomatic relations between Ireland and the US. Together we have and should be proud of the deep and strong bilateral relations that we've developed, that we've built on a rich foundation of ancestral ties. We also have remarkably close economic, diplomatic and political links, including long-standing US support for peace on the island of Ireland. The relationship between Ireland and the US is mutually beneficial. Ireland provides an English-speaking gateway to a European Union of 450 million customers for US companies. As I always say, we've had a couple of days of good weather, but that's not the reason the US companies locate here. They locate here because they do well here. They make a lot of money here. They can access the European markets here, and they can access an incredible labour force. And I'm delighted to see university presidents here who do so much to contribute to our skilled labour market as well. But the relationship is now two-way. Irish companies are now huge employers of American workers, and they're purchasers of American goods and services. People that get out of bed in the morning in all 50 states in the United States who voted for President Donald Trump, and they will go to work in Irish-owned companies. The stories are very clear to see in the numbers. This little country is now the 6th largest source of foreign direct investment into the United States. And this investment supports American jobs, involves significant purchases of American goods and services, and Irish-owned companies are now employing more than 200,000 workers across the US. So when we tell the story of the Irish-US relationship, let's tell the modern story. Let's tell the story of the truthful two-way relationship of today. And similarly, the relationship between the EU and the US is two-way and mutually beneficial. So we see no justification at all for tariffs imposed by the US administration on its trading partners, on its allies, on its friends, including on EU exports. The government's view on this has been consistent throughout. Tariffs are counterproductive, they drive inflation, they push up the cost of goods, and they're bad for consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. We want trade issues to be resolved through substantive, calm, measured dialogue with the US. All sides now need to engage in good faith, because uncertainty and turmoil is not the way forward. And I think we very clearly saw that in a couple of days on the markets not that long ago. These are the messages I delivered when I visited Washington, D.C. in recent weeks, including in my meeting with the US Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. And EU unity is critical. And let me say this, so many people underestimate EU unity. Let me assure those from outside the European Union is more united than ever. Putin didn't think we'd be united on Ukraine, how wrong he was. So many didn't think we'd be united on Brexit, how wrong they were. People didn't think we'd be united to get through the COVID pandemic, how wrong they were. And those who think the European Union will not be united on trade and the economy don't understand the European Union, don't understand our values, and don't understand the purpose and strength of EU unity. So we must keep together. We must support and work with the European Commission. And to any of our friends in the media here today, I often hear this phrase said, trade is an EU competency. It is, but we're in the EU. We're at the table. We're contributing. It's not that they have a little shot over there and decide what to do. We're working with our EU partners, having a voice at the table. Ireland is centrally involved in building alliances and working with other countries who have similar views on trade, similar types of industries there, and working together because that is our strength. When you're a country of 5.6 million people in this part and 7 million on the island, it makes sense to work in a European Union of 460 million people. That is how we will take this forward in a way that protects our national economic interest as well. So it's really important that we control what we can control, that we work with the European Commission. We've already seen the benefits in the positions taken by the EU already in working with them and working intensively with them. And it also shows that we can't rest on our laurels here. No one owes this country or any other country a living. We've got to continue to make this a good country in which to locate your business. We've got to continue to support Irish businesses. We've got to continue to try and provide more markets for businesses. We've got to look at market diversification, alternative markets. We've got to work with our embassies and our state bodies abroad. And we've got to have a sustained focus on competitiveness. Competitiveness is not a nice to do. It's absolutely essential to our economic well-being and prosperity. And we've got to continue to do everything we can to drive competitiveness in support of Irish business, investment in Ireland, jobs, and our continued prosperity. A lot of what I've spoken about this morning has been the breadth of our global engagement. But that engagement starts much closer to home. It starts here on this island, north and south, and it starts in the British-Irish relationship, east and west. Peace and reconciliation on this island and across these islands remains at the heart of our foreign policy. I'm delighted to say, genuinely delighted to say, that we're at a moment where the relationship between Dublin, London and Belfast is warm, is constructive, and has enormous potential. And we cannot squander that opportunity. We have the right interlocutors in place in each of those locations. People who want to take the mantle of the Good Friday Agreement and drive it forward to the benefit of the next generation. And if the experience of the last few years tells us anything, it tells us we can't take that for granted. So we've got to maximise this moment of political stability. And that's exactly what we're doing. In March, we saw the inaugural UK-Ireland Summit in Liverpool, and that agreed an extensive and ambitious agenda for cooperation across foreign and security policy, trade and investment, energy cooperation, education, youth and culture. We reaffirmed at that summit our shared solemn duty as co-guarantors, a phrase that wasn't used nearly enough in recent years. Co-guarantors, our most solemn duty of the Good Friday Agreement, will remain at the heart of that cooperation. And I want to be really clear that I will do everything possible to see whether we can reach agreement with the British government on legacy issues. This is the most sensitive, the most difficult part of our peace process left, and what an incredible, incredible step forward if we could reach an agreement. But to do so, any solution has to be ECHR compliant. It has to command the supports of victims and families, victim-centred, human rights compliant. And I'm pleased to tell you this morning that intensive work on this is underway. It's not easy, but it could not be more important. The thousands of victims and survivors of the Troubles on this island deserve nothing less. 10 days ago, I met with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Hilary Benn, in Hillsborough, and we committed to continuing to work together to see if we can reach agreement in the coming weeks. And I repeat that commitment today. Our work with the Northern Ireland Executive, including the framework on the North-South Ministerial Council, continues. Week in and week out, ministers North and South meet and agree practical cooperation in health, in education, in agriculture, research, innovation, economic cooperation, tourism, environment and transport. And all of this underpins and contributes to a thriving all-island economy with cross-border trade worth in excess of €15 billion per year. Today's programme is also a reminder of the multifaceted nature of international diplomacy. For a country like Ireland, this is achieved through our use of soft power, something we're not bad at, and our use of culture and literature, which we're very proud of, has been calling cards for years in helping to raise awareness of Ireland right across the globe. Today, I'm pleased to say we're going to add something else we're not bad at, sport. And today we add sports diplomacy through the adoption by government later this morning at our meeting of a framework policy on sports diplomacy. Take from this, we will use every opportunity and every avenue to advance our cause and promote our values. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, as we look around the world, from the illegal invasion of Ukraine to the urgent, desperate need for peace in the Middle East, to the challenges facing our global economy, Ireland stands firm in our commitment to international law, multilateralism, and to European and Irish values. We do so not as a passive observer, but as an active, restless contributor to shaping the global response. I firmly believe that Ireland can contribute from a position of practical and lived experience to these global issues. An inward-looking and economically challenged country not that long ago to one of which we can all be proud of today. We Irish are optimistic by nature, but we're not naive to the global and domestic challenges we face. This summit is a reminder of the depth of talent and expertise we have across our global network. I thank all of you for what you do. Together, let's continue to champion in Ireland a country that's outward-looking, that's confident, that's constructive on the world stage. Let's lead with principle and purpose. Let's never fail that values test. Let's never whisper something we're proud of. Thank you so much for being here today.
Our huge thanks to Taoiseach Simon Harris for that opening address. I know he has a very tight and packed schedule, and I think that values test that he opened with will be something we come back to time and time again today. That idea of not being passive, but being assertive, that idea of collaboration across the world stage and continuing to evolve how Ireland plays its part on the world stage. So lots of themes there we'll come back to in panels today. But with that, we're going to go shortly to a panel that's going to be moderated by Shona Murray up here on stage. But before that panel begins, we're going to hear a really important address now from Ukraine's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Andrei Sybiha, who's going to join us here on screen at the Global Irish Summit. You're so very welcome.
Dear Taoiseach, Ministers, honourable guests, dear Taoiseach Harris, I am honoured to address you today. Unfortunately online, but it is still good to be with you, and I am addressing from Kyiv, capital of the country which is in war. Since 2018, this summit has demonstrated Ireland's global presence and impact. It shows your commitment to international cooperation, diplomacy, and humanity. I applaud your vision through Global Ireland 2025. This is the unity we need to defend our shared principles. For us in Ukraine, The 21st century started on February 24th, 2022. In fact, Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014, and it returned with an even larger invasion in less than a decade. This is the biggest and longest war in Europe since the Second World War. For the past 3 years, Putin globalized his aggression. North Korea, Iran, and Russia are working together to destabilize Europe, the Indo-Pacific, and the Middle East. By launching this invasion, Putin weaponized food and energy security, causing global crisis and harming not just Europe, but the global South. My point is simple. This war is not only about Ukraine. It is a major global crisis, not just a Ukrainian or European one. The outcome of this war will shape a new global security order. Putin attacked a rule-based world order based on the UN Charter. He attacked our values, way of life, our dreams and hopes. Putin attacked the very essence of human life. In February 22, most analysts gave Ukraine no more than 3 days or weeks to survive. As of now, Ukraine has been successfully defending itself for over 3 years. Ukraine withstood thanks to the courage of Ukrainian military, our entire nation, and your support. And I would like to express gratitude to every country and nation for your solidarity with Ukraine and unwavering support. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Ireland and its people have stood on the side of good since the very first days of Russia's full-scale invasion. From day one, you extended a hand of help, compassion, and solidarity. Ireland's neutrality has never meant indifference. In the face of aggression in Europe, you choose not to stand aside from human suffering, injustice, and breach of international law. For this, I extend my deepest gratitude to the government and every citizen of Ireland. Thank you for the humanitarian and financial assistance and for taking care of our people. In these dark times, we discovered a new depth of friendship and understanding. Our relation is profound, based on shared values and mutual respect, and we will soon be part of the same EU family. I value Ireland's support for Ukraine's EU accession. With your support, we are moving fast. Ukraine's agriculture, logistics, and defense industry work for the EU. Ukraine is ready and strives to contribute to the EU's strengths. The EU will become stronger with Ukraine as a full member. That's why I'm confident that Ukraine's path towards EU membership will be the top priority of the Irish presidency of the EU Council next year. During the next 2 years, the new seventh year budget for the EU should be crafted and adopted. Let's make the EU budget a budget of new, historic, and peace-building enlargement of the European Union. Ireland's commitment to rebuilding Ukraine is also deeply appreciated. Only a week ago, Minister of State Thomas Byrne visited Ukraine to inaugurate a newly built bomb shelter at a school in Odessa, a joint project of Ireland and Lithuania. This is more than a building. It is a promise to our children that their right to education will endure even under Russian strikes. It is a promise that life will go on, that our future will not be taken away. It is an investment in this future. Ireland's solidarity also extends to those wounded in Russia's war against Ukraine. Together with Estonia, Ireland is supporting the construction of modern rehabilitation center in Berdychi, Zhytomyr region. This facility will offer healing and hope to thousands of civilians and soldiers. I am grateful for Ireland's support for our reconstruction and participation in the previous Ukraine recovery conferences. We would welcome Ireland's presence at the highest level at the next such conference in Rome this year. Ukraine's post-war reconstruction will be the main European investment project of the 21st century. We will be glad to have Ireland among our true partners in this endeavor. Dear friends, Ukraine did not start this war, and we want peace more than anyone else in the world. Ukraine is not losing, Russia is not winning. This is confirmed by the situation on the battlefield. With the current speed of advance, it would take Russia around 9 years to fully occupy only the Donetsk region. Every day, Russians are losing approximately 1,500 soldiers killed and wounded in action. These are the bloodiest square kilometers any army has captured in modern history. But Ukraine is ready to give diplomacy a chance. We are committed to peace. On March 11, almost 2 months ago, we unconditionally accepted the US proposal for a full ceasefire for 30 days. Putin rejected this proposal. Russia constantly proves that it has never sought peace, but always seeks war. Russia is demonstrating to the world that it was and is the only source of this war. Ukraine never was the obstacle for peace, and we are not the obstacle for peace. Now we are witnessing a new hybrid tactic of manipulation by the Kremlin. Moscow is proposing Easter operate ceasefires, but they are not serious. We need a confidence-building measures, such as the return of our forcibly deported children and civilians, prisoners of war. We need to pressure Russia to say clear yes for unconditional full ceasefire in the air, at sea, and on land, at least for 30 days. This can start the path to real peace. Ukraine is ready for a ceasefire at any time, as well as for the start of negotiations on real peace in any format, including with the involvement of the Russian side. We believe it is time to increase pressure on Moscow to force it to peace. Military deterrence and economic pressure on the Kremlin, as well as increasing support for Ukraine. I urge you to use your voice, a voice heard and respected across Europe and the world, to persuade EU partners to enhance sanctions against Russia. Sanctions targeting Russia's banking sector, shadow fleet, LNG, and other areas will slow down the Russian war machine and persuade Moscow to seek peace. We call for a complete ban on Russian energy in the EU. This is the only way to achieve true energy security in Europe. We are grateful for Ireland's contribution of non-lethal military assistance and financial support. 250 million euros through the EU Peace Facility, 80 million through the European Union for the procurement of the non-lethal military equipment. I thank Ireland for participating in the EU military training mission for Ukraine, the demining and IT coalitions, and the Grain from Ukraine program. These initiatives have multiple effects. First, they strengthen the capabilities of our defenders. Second, provide critical support in strengthening Ukrainians' resilience. Third, contribute to global security. The security of Ukraine, Ireland, Europe, and the entire transatlantic community is indivisible. We are ready to share our technologies and capacities, particularly in the security and militech sectors, to strengthen you and the entire EU. Recently, we have launched the Food from Ukraine program to help Syrian people at the crucial moment. Together with our partners, we have already delivered almost 5,000 tons of wheat flour. We invite Ireland to join our partners, among which are Luxembourg, Norway, the United Kingdom, and Germany, in supporting this humanitarian initiative. Your investment in the Food from Ukraine initiative will be a truly impactful investment in global food security. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout history, Ireland has championed human rights, the rule of law, and the pursuit of truth. As we see the growing Russian disinformation, I urge Ireland and all Irish diplomats to help us convey the truth to the world. We need your expose aggression, crimes, and lies. Together we can rally even more nations to stand with Ukraine in defense of freedom and democracy. Ireland has chosen the right side of history. You join the coalition of nations that stand for the truth. Together we will defend not only Ukraine, but also the very principles that sustain the international order and the hopes of future generations. I look forward to Irish participation in the informal EU Foreign Affairs Council in Ukraine on May 9th. It will also be a day of important political efforts to speed up the launch of the special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Time has come. Everything is ready for justice. Thank you once again, Ireland, for being our partner and our true friend. Thank you for standing with us, with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. May the wind be always at your back. Thanks a lot.
It was very fitting that we started. You can't hear. Is there microphones? Are they working now? Is that it? Okay, perfect. Apologies. So my name is Shona Murray, and we're going to have this discussion, which I mentioned there, is responding to a changing geopolitical landscape. And I'll just introduce very briefly our panelists. We heard there from the Foreign Affairs Minister, Andrei Sybiha, from Ukraine. We have Mike O'Sullivan, Susan Davis here beside me, Dr. Maida Rug here on my right. We have Dennis Staunton here, and Dr. Happy Mon-Jacob. But I won't really get into the introductions because we don't have a huge amount of time. But it was very fitting that we started off a discussion about the changing geopolitical landscape with the Ukraine Foreign Affairs Minister. Mike, I might just start with you there. Because, of course, Ukraine, as the Minister said, and also as the Taoiseach said, is really fighting on the front line, not just for its own future, but for the future of international law. Can you just tell us, I mean, what's your response to what we heard there regarding Ukraine and whether or not Europe can stick together in defending Ukraine, come what may?
So I've just come from Paris, and President Macron made one of a number of important speeches yesterday. And I would say, just to put it in context, we've come to the end of globalization, and globalization was Ireland's period in history. We're going into a multipolar world where big regions will increasingly do things differently, and this is kind of France's world. It's back to a 19th century world, a more brutal world, a world of great game competition. We'll hear lots of quotes about Palmerston. It's a world into which you can't go being naive or unprepared or unarmed. And if I take France specifically, I think France is probably less focused on Ukraine specifically, but more on its relationship with Russia, and there's a huge rethink of the French relationship with Russia. I think in France they feel this is a time that proves them right. They were always cynical about America's role in the world. They've always maintained the biggest army in Europe and the biggest arms sector in Europe. So this is, I think, a world where France feels it's ready probably to lead. Specifically for Ireland, there's two things I want to flag. In France and other European countries, Sweden, Germany, even Austria, the public debate there is very different to the public debate here. And I feel that here we're much more sheltered, and there's less urgency, and we're not discussing the same things that are top of the news in France. And then the second thing is that tomorrow Friedrich Merz will come to Paris, and for the first time in 4 or 5 years, the European locomotive, the engine of political momentum in Europe is going to get going again. And that's really important for Europe, it's really important for Ireland, because we have to be on that. And I think we always feel we're a little bit in the American camp, a bit in the British camp, and a bit in the European camp, and that's great, but the point is this is a time where countries are going to be forced to choose, and there's going to be a hardening, I think, of policy in Europe, and a more directional tack on things like defense, finance, and the economy.
Is microphones working now? Just want to double check. They're okay? Yeah, very good. Okay. Maida Rugg, I want to come to you. And by the way, Friedrich Merz, I don't know if anyone has realized that he has failed already this morning in becoming Chancellor in his initial stage. Let's see if he goes to Paris tomorrow. He may have more domestic issues at hand. But Maida, just the point that Mike was making there, I mean, we're getting straight into the United States and its role, because we heard from the Ukrainian foreign minister that Ukraine accepted back in March a US negotiated peace deal that hasn't materialized in the way that people hoped. The United States is now talking about maybe walking away and resigning from its position. I mean, where do you see Europe now in this moment?
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Is my microphone working? Thank you very much. Well, as I was listening to this incredibly inspiring and powerful speech by your foreign minister, I was kind of struggling to think of more than 2 or 3 points where Trump administration is currently on board. Whether we're talking about support of values, international law, whether we're talking about that sort of value-based approach to Ukraine and the peace deal. I think the reality is that Trump administration has checked out as a partner of many on these issues. And so specifically to negotiations on Ukraine, the approach that has been taken until now has, on one side, A, actively excluded the Europeans, and B, it has led these negotiations based on really an extractive approach rather than on value-based approach, without much regard to territorial sovereignty, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Ukraine, etc. So if we do get a peace deal, it's going to be looking much different from what Europeans would define as a deal in accordance to their interests. The second point is, how long will that ceasefire hold and last, and what Europeans need to do meanwhile to, in fact, equip Ukraine sufficiently to prevent another offensive if Russia decides to rearm and continue.
Dennis, I know that you're obviously based in Beijing, but you're a European affairs, one of the Irish Times for a long time before. Would you agree with that? Would you say that's a realistic or quite a pessimistic view we've heard so far about the role of the United States and basically Europe being on its own, and also in relation to values, which we heard the Taoiseach being very descriptive about?
I think it is very realistic, both of what we've heard. I mean, I think if you think about the last big foreign policy crisis that this state had to face, it was Brexit. And there again, we were dealing with an indispensable partner that had taken a decision and taken an action which was inimical to our interest and which was likely to have lasting effects for a long time. And in the case of Britain, like in the case of the US, this is a country that for economic and historical and cultural reasons, as well as reasons of kinship, we can't turn our backs on. We can't not have a relationship with these people. But nonetheless, the relationship has changed. And the Irish state's approach to the Brexit crisis was to identify our interests in a very clear-eyed fashion and to pursue those interests with vigor and with imagination and with a degree of ruthlessness. And this is an approach, I think, that would be appropriate during the current crisis as well. Likewise, for the European Union, and maybe start with thinking about our economic interests. And first of all, defending them, but also looking beyond the relationship with the United States to other opportunities. So, for example, if you think about China, the European Union has legitimate issues and complaints about how China operates in the trading environment. But there are also other restrictions which Europe introduced on its trade with China for kind of national security reasons which were partially inspired by the United States. Now, if there are opportunities in China for a country like Ireland or for the European Union, maybe we should start to think in a slightly different way about these opportunities to the way in which we did before. And you mentioned values, and the Taoiseach spoke quite properly about the centrality of values in Irish foreign policy. But again, one of those values that he mentioned was the multipolar institutions, the international institutions, the United Nations. Countries like China and other countries in the global south share that commitment. But we also live in a world where the relationship between national sovereignty and universal rights is a contested one. And until now, the European approach, as being part of the very powerful collective West, as they would say in Moscow, it was to assert our values, to assert our position on human rights, and to attempt to push this through. This hasn't been effective. And if actually you were to look at how we might effectively promote this element of our values in today's world, maybe we should look at how you actually negotiate new frameworks which take recognition of the fact that Europe's position in the world has changed, that we can't be moral leaders in the world because the rest of the world doesn't want our moral leadership. It doesn't believe that we have the standing to provide it. And so that with a certain amount of humility, perhaps we ought to approach these issues in a way which is always keeping in mind what ought to be the central preoccupation, which is the welfare of actually existing people elsewhere in the world.
And I think that's the EU's obviously taking that perspective when it's saying it wants to deal with and engage with trade with over 80% of the rest of the world, given the difficulties that are ongoing with the United States. But just, Susan, I want to bring it back to the United States to you, because when we spoke before, you made that point. The relationship has changed, not just with Europe, but Ireland specifically. And the very, very emotional relationship Ireland has had with the United States, in particular under Joe Biden, has utterly changed, and this is completely transactional. But does it take into account all of the statistics that the Taoiseach mentioned there about Ireland being responsible for foreign direct investment, the amount of Americans being employed by Irish companies? Just talk us through and tell everybody how you see this relationship.
Oh, it's lovely to be in this position to have to answer that right now. I would say, first of all, yes, the relationship has changed, but has changed not because it's Ireland-US. The relationship has changed with every country in the world because this administration, the new administration, is not values-based. It's completely transaction-based, and as a result, past is not necessarily prologue, and for so many years, Ireland has enjoyed this tremendous bond with the US, and that hasn't changed at all. But what has changed is how the Trump administration looks at every issue. And every issue is looked at with regard to what's best for America in the view of this administration. So it's all about now America first. However, you can't disregard the bond that has always been there, and you can't disregard, as the Taoiseach says, the diaspora. You can't disregard the heritage that we have, and it isn't being disregarded. It just is not first. The priority is America first, and everything else falls underneath that.
How does Ireland tackle that?
Well, I think there are a lot of ways to tackle it, and I think that the ambassador and her team are just doing a tremendous job, as well as the government here, in messaging in a way that's heard, and messaging with language that is not only acceptable but important to this administration. But I also think that you can tap the diaspora. The diaspora is very strong, and when you have 35 million Americans of Irish descent, there are many influencers and many that have not yet been tapped that could be tapped. I was very much encouraged by the minister's discussion of sports diplomacy. We have a president, of course, who really cares a lot about that, and particularly about golf. And I think sports diplomacy is a brilliant new part of the diplomatic mission. I also think it's extremely important to reach out to and continue to reach out to members of Congress to educate them, because we have a Congress
that are, the majority are Republicans, of course, but not a lot really understand all the issues, you know, and all politics are local in every country, and especially in the US. That was said by Tip O'Neill, and I think that it's extremely important to show how that relates in congressional districts, how Irish interests relate to congressional districts.
Okay. Happy one. Okay, so we know that the Ukraine war is an existential crisis for Europe, but the Ukrainian Foreign Affairs Minister said it's essentially an existential crisis for the world, for international law, for the rules-based system. How is that viewed from your perspective, from India and so on? I mean, is it seen as a regional conflict? Is it seen like something new is trying to be born? Just tell us your assessment.
Thank you, Shona, for that question. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Ambassador Kevin Kelly, for bringing me here. You know, I would say that there is a great deal of sympathy for Ukraine in India. There's no doubt about that. You know, hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. But I think this is broadly seen as a war that is being fought in Europe, and this is a European war. That's how widely it's seen in India. I think the world looks somewhat different from India than the way it looks from here in Europe. I mean, Dennis, I think you took some of the thunder away from what I was going to say. But I think when we look at the international system from where we are located from India, the world looks clearly conflictual. The world clearly looks more conflict-prone. Definitely, yes, it's unstable. There is instability, no doubt about it. But the world also looks bigger today. If you look at the multipolarity that people are talking about, there is a great deal of conversations among countries about what should be the nature of the next world order, as it were. There's a lot more consultation that's happening. There is also a certain amount of, I think, empathy for the views of others, as it were. So if you ask me, am I worried about, concerned about the instability in the international system? I would say, yes, I'm worried about it, but I'm not going to lose sleep about the instability in the international system today, because sometimes you need a little bit of instability for the new world order to be born. For change to happen, you need a little kick, right? I mean, change is very lazy. It needs a little push. I think this has created that push in the international system where countries like ours, I mean, it's 1,400 million people. We were not asked about our opinions on the world order. Today, there are Europeans and others reaching out to us asking about what we think about the next world order. And we therefore have a viewpoint to keep, I mean, China has a viewpoint on what should be the nature of the world order going forward.
And where do you think, how do these discussions then take place to engage in a way where at the very least, there is a basic standard of values? I mean, I take the point, and it's been said so many times over the past few decades, that imposing values doesn't take into account culture, for example, and it's also an imposition without any engagement. So where do you think we go from here with that?
Let me just come back to the US in this context, right? Because I think what Susan has said is that the relationship has changed because it's no longer values-based, but transactional. I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that US has always been transactional in its foreign policy. What has changed, and why this transactional relation has changed, is that Trump has redefined in his administration the whole set of interests. What is actually an American interest? Is it an American interest to have an alliance with the EU? Is it in American interest to have free trade? Is it in American interest to support multilateral institutions and the global system? And I think if you look at what is happening in the US in terms of redefining the values and interests, the whole sort of echo on that on international system is basically sort of replicating the change at home. And I just want to, you know, for the sake of discussion of the values, because we're writing a paper at the ECFR of that. Out of 139 executive orders the Trump administration has passed since in the first 100 days, about 20 of them deal with the transformation of American culture. So basically the war against liberalism in culture. 23 of them eliminating the federal agencies and putting Schedule F into effect, which means basically, you know, getting rid of bureaucracy, firing heads of departments, etc. And 30 is putting pressure on the political opponents, whether these are considered universities or law firms, etc. Now I think that transformation in the US is absolutely reflecting on its position on international system that is value-based and institution-based, whether it's through getting rid of the programs like USAID and Voice of America, whether it's through undermining the international multilateral institutions like WTO. If you look at the trade war, how they treat, generally global system of institutions. And so just kind of thinking about Ireland and going back to sort of, sorry not to mention, but EU itself. Mm-hmm. We had Vice President J. Vance holding a speech at the Munich Security Conference, which was a direct assault on the EU. We have repeated sort of outreach from Washington to the far-right populist parties that are anti-EU in their agenda, etc. So to me, just the question on where do we go from here, and especially as Ireland, do you sort of only engage in bilateral relationship trying to mend Irish-US relation, or do you as Ireland give your voice to the European Union and its values, which I think is much needed, and where I think Ireland is in a really good position to do so? That would be the essential step for kind of, if you want, saving the EU.
I want to very quickly come in on the values versus interest question. I mean, this is philosophically speaking, there's been a lot of debate about whether there is a conflict between values and interests. I think sometimes the conflict is exaggerated. Sometimes, for example, the free and open Indo-Pacific, is that a value or an interest? It's both a value and interest. So sometimes a value is an interest. Sometimes interests masquerade as values. Sometimes common interests can become common values. The question of democracy that we just raised, democracy clearly is a great value. But remember, democracy as a value should not just be confined to domestic spaces. How you govern a country, that's not the only space where we should talk about democracy. How is the international order governed? How is the international order created? How is it sort of taken forward? Is there enough democracy there? So I think democracy has to be looked at from various perspectives. So I think when you think of values and interests, both are important. But I think it's important to have conversations among various people, among various cultures, among various systems as to what's the difference between the two.
Dennis, do you want to come in there, because that's something similar to maybe the point you're making? Yeah.
No, I agree, and I do think that it's certainly necessary for us to talk about the shape of the order. I would just like to clarify that if I'm speaking about how we should pursue our values, I'm not suggesting at all that we should dilute our commitment to rights, and particularly, say, to rights of unpopular minorities. I'm talking simply about the most effective means of doing it. And in the same way, I think that, if we're speaking about the democratization of the global order, I do also think, by the way, that Ireland is in a particularly good position, in that we do have, for various historical reasons, and also because of the conduct of Irish diplomacy over the years, we do have a certain kind of standing in parts of the global south, whereas among European countries we would be seen as people who do approach these things with a more respectful approach. And so I do think that as a country influencing European Union policies towards this, I think we do have a position.
Do you agree with that, Mike? Would you think that Ireland has that role within the European Union setting? I think it's very important, the Global South perspective, because we heard the Taoiseach there being hugely critical of the lack of involvement of the European Union in the past when it comes to the situation in Gaza and the Palestinians. And Ireland sort of stands out to a certain extent there, but it does also then gain support from the Global South, which has been critical of the European Union for potentially having double standards in this regard.
Yeah, I think that reinforces the point that the debate in Ireland is quite different to other countries. I think on a European basis, I cannot emphasize enough that the era of the last 30 years has come to an end. We're at a violent turning point. And for European democracies, we're having a diplomatic or a geopolitical crash in the way you would have a stock market crash, in that all the things we have assumed in the best values and the best interests, things like benign America, stable UK, two-state solution, the UN, are now being ripped apart by their original architect, the States. Russia loves this. China is not going to put them back together. And the initial phases of a stock market crash are denial and pain. And I think in that context, we have to kind of rethink how we do things and how we look at things. So one is risk management of diplomacy. If you take a view, what happens if it goes wrong or the circumstances change? What are my safe assets? What's my safe haven? I think in this case it's Europe. And then I look at other small countries, and I'll give you two examples. I think we should perhaps invest even more in countries like Singapore and Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi is becoming the Washington of the Middle East. Singapore, if you want to know what influential people in Indonesia are thinking, go to Singapore, because that's where they tend to coalesce. And those two countries are very different to us culturally. They've had the same path of development. They have the same very, very open outlook on the world. And then the second thing maybe is to benchmark ourselves against other small countries in terms of defense and security. One of the curious things about the public debate on Ireland's defense stance was a lot of it was about neutrality and whether we should be part of NATO, and very little of it seemed to be about the capabilities. And I think we have to invest massively in capabilities in security, intelligence, defense. If we were to have the same defensive capabilities as Norway, we would have to spend 4% of GDP for the next 10 years. So that shows the challenge that is ahead and shows where the benchmark is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just briefly on the debate and the discussion of strategic autonomy in Europe, a lot of it is about defense, but there's less thinking beyond that towards strategic autonomy diplomatically. So, for example, at some stage, the war in Ukraine is either going to end or move into a different phase. And the European Union will have to negotiate its security. And its security depends on having a relationship with Russia. It depends on working out what that relationship is. That can involve strengthening defense. Strengthening defense may be part of forming that relationship. But it also means the Europeans thinking independently of what their relationship with Russia should be and with China, independently of the United States. So the United States doesn't simply impose a relationship on us.
Yeah,
I do think that's true. I think Europeans so far, perhaps because things have been happening so quickly, we've moved to the pace of the US. And we probably need to stop and think and set our own agenda. I think that's true.
I'd just say that's ideally where we want to be, but we probably have a long period to bridge before we are there, because until we have that strategic autonomy on defense and capabilities, we're really constrained into what we can do independently on sort of deciding on Russia and China. And the US is certainly, using that dependency to sort of put demands on other issues.
Just before I go back to Susan, Dennis, because you mentioned that China wants to be part of the multilateral system, whether it's the WTO and so on. But the EU still has issues with China, obviously when it comes to trade, whether it's subsidies or oversupply and so on. But moreover is the NATO belief that China is the chief enabler of the war in Ukraine, supporting Russia indirectly and so on. So how can Europe then re-engage or engage stronger with China on that footing, on that basis?
Well, I think, first of all, that in the next phase, in the negotiation of the peace, it may be that China is more helpful to the Europeans than America is. Insofar, like even now, already, the Chinese have been saying that the Europeans have to be in the room when these negotiations are taking place. So there's no question but that China has been supportive of Russia diplomatically, economically, and all kinds of other ways. But as we get into the next phase of this, it may be that China's role is, from our point of view, more useful than it is obstructive.
Because of, do you think that's emerging because of the United States sort of belligerent relationship with China?
I think it's actually just that China's interest is actually in stability. It has good relations with both Ukraine and Russia, but obviously the relationship with Moscow is more important.
Happy when you were laughing there?
Oh no, I was. I'm sort of puzzled by the how China is perceived internationally. I mean, there are times when the Americans will tell you, hey, here is the primary contradiction as far as we are concerned. They stand against everything that we sort of have stood for, and therefore let's rally together to sort of confront this sort of primary contradiction. And then some days we hear, no, we can't live without China. China is important. It's a major trade partner. we are next door. I mean, we have a problem with China. We have a complicated relationship with China. We have had wars with China, but we're sort of learning to live with that big power 5 times our size next door to us. For the first time in India's first time in India's history, actually, we have a superpower rising next door. So sometimes the Americans or people in the West would ask us, would you stand with us when we sort of try and checkmate China? No. Why? Because, well, you will change your view at some point of time. Not only that, but also because we go to deal with these guys for time immemorial. There's no way of getting around that. So I think so I think my point there, what I'm trying to make is, when you ask other countries, do you stand with us? Do you stand against somebody? It's a complicated question. Those countries simply can't make those decisions on one fine morning simply because you would like those countries to make those decisions. It's more complicated.
Susan, where does it, when obviously you're based in DC, and when you're hearing people like Mike saying, where globalization is falling to pieces, crushing in, we're in denial if we think that we're going to be able to save it, and also the language around the United States not being, I suppose, there when it comes to NATO and so on. And, is that the conversation that's being had in the US, or do you feel this is quite surprising?
No, I don't feel it's surprising, but it depends on the room that you're in.
Yeah, of course, yeah, without a doubt.
That conversation is happening in certain places, but I mean, that's really not where the U.S. is going, and I don't think that's where this administration or any of the administration wants to go. Obviously, in the first Trump administration, he had his position that, China was a strategic competitor that really had to be dealt with. It was very popular with his base. It's extremely popular with the base now, so that isn't going to change at all. And at the same time, he's got an affection for Russia for some reason. And so, again, he's trying to convince the base that the boogeyman is on the China side. However, in terms of globalization, I mean, it's extremely important for our country. And, our key members of Congress, our influencers, our industries, et cetera, they're all firm believers in globalization. So we're not going backwards, for certain. And we're,
Okay, so you disagree with this assessment about deglobalization?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you've measured globalization, right, so migration, we're reversing migration patterns. You can't have globalization when the two big economies of the world aren't even talking to each other and imposing tariffs on each other. You have regions doing things no longer the American way, but in very regionally specific ways. So I'm debate this all day, but I think we've left globalization behind. What's also interesting, I think we haven't talked about finance and economics, because all of these things are now intensely bundled. Military superiority depends on indebtedness. The US spends 3 times as much on interest payments now than it does its military. And financial markets are beginning just to have the thread pulled out of them. And for the first time, probably since 120 years, investors are now pondering whether the treasury market is actually a safe haven. And you're beginning to see bond yields rise when they should actually be falling. So for me, that's another maybe point of worry. It's another opportunity for the EU. It's an opportunity for Ireland, because one of the areas where we are relatively strong is that our debt has come down quite a bit, and we're kind of a safer country.
Susan, though, I mean, you're obviously America. You said globalization is very important for your country. It is, of course. Is that being recognized, though? Because it seems to be that there's a very much anti-globalization viewpoint coming from Donald Trump and his supporters. So will they reverse that? Will they do a deal with China? Will they do a deal with the United States, do you think? Or with the EU, do you think?
I think they will. I mean, I think those conversations are ongoing, and some of them are public and some of them aren't public. And the president has to do those deals. He promised to do those deals. And this is a president, unlike most presidents that in our history made a lot of promises during the campaign, and he's actually following through on all of them, good or bad. However, I think that, first of all, they're saying that there will be a number of deals that are going to be talked about in the near future. Let's hope that that's true. However, we can't, Michael's view of globalization might be different than mine, and he's more of an expert. But I think it's, we're not in a purist sort of an environment right now, and we have to deal with the whole geopolitical environment that we're in and the polarization not only of the US, but countries all over the world. And that all has to be factored into this. But, in the end, if we're going to survive as economies, we can't be insular.
Yeah. Maida, did you want to come in there?
There's so much, Trump's promises to do deals, if you look at his promises, Israel-Gaza, Russia-Ukraine, rip apart JCPOA during his first term, which took blood and sweat to put together, and year of expertise to kind of say, I'm going to easily renegotiate a better better deal. And we're miles away from where we were when he was negotiating the Iran deal. These are all ongoing. He claims victory. It falls apart. Doesn't matter. He moves on to the next one. And what that deal sort of delivers, what substance it is, what the consequences are, don't really matter as long as he can check out the box and claim victory. So I'm sort of careful about trusting and taking his words, and when we consider European and Irish interests, really at the face value. On trade deals, yes, that's what he's striving for. However, is he going to get there? The sort of absolute sidelining of expertise in many of these issues, which was another, by the way, electoral pledge. Trump openly campaigned on, agenda against globalism, against global elites, he called warmongers, and against expertise. They said in Heritage 2025 program that you'd better staff your administration going through the phone book and picking random names than naming experts. And I think that lack of expertise is visible in his absolute lack of strategy in the approach to the trade negotiations, opening trade war with everyone at the same time and then negotiating. So I'm a bit more skeptical on where we're going to get to.
Just on that, because obviously Ireland is awaiting the investigations into the pharmaceutical tariffs, and potentially we'll see tariffs on pharmaceutical goods leaving this country. Do you think because there's been lack of carry-through on Trump's decisions around tariffs, that maybe Ireland can, I wouldn't say rest easy, but maybe not be as concerned that the pharmaceutical industry will leave this island and go back to the United States? Does anyone want to take that?
I'll just give you an anecdote. So 7 years ago, I did two speeches with J.D. Vance. And at the time, he was quite a different person to how he is now. And he was talking about innovation, education. He'd been to Yale, Harvard. And now he's ripping up all of those elements, which shows, I think, how values have changed in the administration in the States. I still think that's the model for Ireland, is education, innovation, but there's two, I think, differences. So one is that we can no longer expect the same level of foreign direct investment from big US multinationals, because I think their first instinct will be to stay in the States. So we have to look for new sources of marginal investment. And then the second one is on strategic autonomy, which is very, very live in innovation cities like Munich and Paris and Berlin. But we have to decide which elements of that could be quantum, AI, et cetera, that we're really going to focus on and play a part in a European economy.
But I think that's such an important point, that obviously it's quite clear that the US is not going to be the source of foreign direct investment that it has been for us. And that's likely also to be the case for quite some time. Again, if you look at the model of Brexit, here we are nearly 10 years later, and they've got a Labour government with a huge majority, led by a man who was looking for a second referendum on Brexit. And yet, the constraint of, his constraints are so tight, and the body politic has been essentially toxified by this for another decade. So we can operate on the basis that whatever change is happening in the US, it's not going to be reversed for some time. And if, as Mike says, you're going to see foreign direct investment not coming from the US in the same numbers, then we do have to look elsewhere. And among the places that we have to look elsewhere, obviously, are the biggest economies in the world, and that would mean China. And once again, Ireland is in a good position because of the fact that there are good relations between Ireland and China, and it would seem to me to be a good idea at this moment, in the spirit of self-interest and pursuing your interests ruthlessly, to go for it.
On the globalization question, I think I totally agree with what Denny said again. because maybe you're in China and I'm in India. I think it's a sentiment about globalization that I think we are missing today. The sentiment about globalization is on the decline, about travel, tourism, trade, students going back and forth, cultural backlashes, rise of the right wing. We are looking at a sentiment that's growing globally, which is anti-globalization in some ways. Globalization is no more the romantic word that it used to be at a certain point of time in the 80s and 90s. It's funny that countries like India, who have not really had much of a say in the sort of creation of this world order, are now the biggest votaries of globalization, right? We're talking about WTO, we're talking about the UN system, etc., etc. You look at the UN system, what you see is the family picture of the victors of the Second World War plus China. And countries like India and South Africa and Brazil are saying that we need this, we need to reform this. I think the job for countries like yours and ours, Ireland and India, is to sort of look for ways to reform the contemporary world order, bring that romance back into globalization, and look for like-minded partners in other parts of the world.
Do you think that's possible?
I think that's definitely possible. We are at the cusp of a major change internationally. We don't know what's going to emerge 5 years, 10 years from now, but I think if you don't take the opportunity now and start thinking about what comes next in forums such as this, we're going to miss the bus.
Okay, I just want to give you a quick moment to wrap up, but I just want to ask you, Maida, because we started with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Andrei Sybiha. Where do you think the United States is going to be in relation to the negotiations in the war in Ukraine, in relation to its position in NATO? We already have the coalition of the willing for a reason, and the reason is that the United States is not going to be part of it.
I think we need to make a distinction between Ukraine and NATO. Maybe because I haven't done that. I think United States position, first of all, we almost have a power-sharing coalition in Washington. There's Pentagon and Vice President's office that are much, much strongly more on the restrainer side.
Yeah.
And they would like to see minimized role of US in NATO. But that I don't think is yet happening. However, what the administration at this point of time wants to see is sort of stopping what they've seen as mission creep of NATO, right? They want NATO to go back to its original role. They do not want any further enlargement. They don't want any sort of perspective of NATO-based security guarantees for Ukraine, precisely because they want to sort of consolidate and avoid any sort of escalation that could drag the United States into conflict.
And they want Europe to take over as well, burden shift.
Absolutely. There's the idea of burden shifting. The Europeans are now, at the upcoming summit in Hague, they're going to commit to 3%. The Americans are asking for 5%. Everyone's going to fudge the figures a little bit. However, there's that trend of burden shifting and saying, Europeans, you're in charge of your own security, and you need to backfill for potential withdrawal of the US. Whether that withdrawal is going to come of the troops, there was an idea being floated of European SACEUR.
Okay.
I think these are the ideas that Pentagon would like to see, but they're not translating into administration's policy yet. I think on Ukraine, it's a completely different sort of approach, right? It is a bit of an extractive approach. Let's get the minerals deal done so that somehow US will provide security guarantees through its economic interests. If it gets to that point, no, I don't think it is enough. But that is the approach. And I think the question for Europeans is really how do they deal with an entirely transformed partner whose strategic objectives are no longer the same. And I think we really need to keep in mind Trump administration's strategic objectives vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine are no longer the same ones as the European Union's, except maybe for Hungary. And a couple of other EU member states.
Thank you. Happy on just to wrap up.
My only final point is that you asked me what does India think of the Ukraine war. I think we have our own wars to fight in our own region. We have our own difficulties and problems. So therefore, I think what India thinks about the Ukraine war may be less important. What's probably more important is what India thinks about the international system and whether the Europeans can actually work with a country like India in order to sort of bring in more positivity, prosperity, and security and stability to the international system. So I think in India, you are probably going to find a willing partner that's willing to talk about some of these things in a more, let's say, mutually constructive sort of manner. You're looking at a country that is reformist in nature, not revisionist in nature. You're looking at a country that is willing to sort of play the role of a bridge between various geopolitical fault lines internationally. So I think that conversation must be taken forward. The question about where India stands on the Ukraine war
doesn't apply to sanctions, for example,
it doesn't apply for the simple reason that we have issues with, say, Pakistan or China, and we have to fight those wars by ourselves. So it's a 1,400 million country with a huge sort of territory. It has to defend each inch of it. It's complicated. So I think the Russians are important, the Chinese are important, the Europeans are important. I think it's important to see that complexity for what it is.
Susan.
I think with regard to Ukraine, it's important to realize that the Americans were tremendously supportive during the Biden administration. That support went down initially during the beginnings of the Trump administration, which I have to remind people is only 100 days, so he might have not followed through on all his promises, but nevertheless, it's only 100 days. However, all of the polls are showing now that the support by the American people for continuing to support Ukraine are going up, and in some cases over 50%. And it's Democrats and independents especially, but Republicans are beginning to move in that direction. I also think you're going to see that this administration is going to stick with support. And also, I just want to mention, Maja, that minerals deal also includes military spending, which is very important to Ukraine.
Mike.
So I think the substance of a deal on Ukraine will ultimately be set by the big European powers and the UK, who I think are being very, very gutsy on this particular issue. And we may ultimately gain Ukraine as an EU member, possibly lose Hungary and Serbia may not join. But I think many European countries are actually preparing for some form of conflict with Russia in the next 4 or 5 years, and we have to prepare for that as well.
I think Ireland should follow Susan's advice and continue to nurture and nourish our relationships in the United States politically, socially, and culturally, and on a person-to-person basis. Also, we ought to recognize that for the next while, and possibly for longer than we would wish, the United States will not be our friend when it comes to pursuing our interests or our values. And if we want help there, we need to look elsewhere, and perhaps to look beyond the traditional partners, to look beyond alliances of democracies. And also, I think if one of our interests is to strengthen the international multilateral system, that we need to work with countries like India, like China, like other countries in the global south to strengthen those institutions, and that those ought to be priorities for us.
Okay, well, thank you to an excellent panel. Really appreciate it. And earlier, Andrei, the Minister for Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. Thank you. Yeah.
Such a good job with the time. Great. Excellent. I can't believe we got so much.
I know we did, yeah. Thank you, everybody. I might ask you just to take a seat for our next speaker, Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. Dr. Birol, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and honor to be back to Ireland, to Dublin, to share some of the thoughts about the global energy sector. But before starting my words on energy, may I take this opportunity to thank the Irish government, especially the Irish diplomats around the world. I travel a lot, wherever I go, which country I go. Many times I meet smiling, supportive Irish diplomats. I really thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. Thank you. Dear colleagues, when we look at the world, we are an energy organization, but we are following the world events, and there is a seismic change in a geopolitical domain, and it does affect the energy sector as it does many things in our societies. No country is an energy island, big or small, south or north, east or west. Countries around the world are connected in energy terms through energy prices, technological innovation, carbon dioxide emissions. They are all interconnected. So therefore, there is no energy island. I am going to tell you today, share with you two things. One, the very notion of that we are, I believe, entering the age of electricity, what it means, talk about it, what are the drivers of that. And the second thing, I will share with you, as the things stand today, three major challenges we have in the global energy system. Let me start with the first one. Dear colleagues, we know from the movies, from the novels of the industrial age, which was fueled by coal. Remember the novels of the writings of Charles Dickens or Emile Zola and the others. The coal was the driver fueling the industry revolution around the world and helped the economies years to come. Then the age of coal has been replaced by the age of oil and gas. And they have brought a lot of economic growth, lift hundreds of millions out of poverty, the oil and gas. We will still use oil and gas years to come, but I see, when I look at the numbers, we are entering the age of electricity. Dear colleagues, in the last 10 years, global total energy demand, all energy demand increased, but electricity demand increased 2 times higher than the total energy demand. And in the next 10 years, we expect global electricity demand will increase 6 times higher than the total energy demand. There is a big electrification of our economies. Why electricity demand is increasing so strongly? What are the drivers? There are at least 3 new additional drivers to global electricity demand, which sees huge growth. Number one, many of you will not think at all. Today, dear colleagues, big growth of global electricity consumption comes from increasing number of air conditioners coming from the emerging countries. Today in the United States or in China, 90% of households, they have an air conditioner. In India, it is 19%. Indonesia, 20%. Nigeria, 5%. When people have money in their pocket, one of the things they do is to buy air conditioner, also with the increasing temperatures, to have a comfort. And this gives a big boost to global electricity consumption. The second one is increasing share of electric cars. Only 4 years ago, 5% of all the cars sold in the world was electric car, and now it is 25% of all the cars sold in the world are electric cars. They are driving the electricity demand. A third and the new addition to the electricity age growth of electricity is artificial intelligence and data centers. Just to give you, put in a context, a medium-sized data center, and they are mushrooming around the world, a medium-sized data center consumes electricity as much as 100,000 households. They need electricity, and they need electricity 24/7. So therefore, we see that this additional 3 drivers, air conditioners increasing, the artificial intelligence data centers are becoming very strong, and at the same time, we are having a major increase with the electric vehicles, means global electricity demand is very strong. And in Ireland, you see it. In fact, Ireland, when I look at Europe, Ireland is a very different path. In Europe, in the last 5 years, European electricity consumption declined, and in Ireland increased by 3%. Completely different paths, opposite paths, in fact, driven by AI and other things. So electricity demand is coming strongly, and the question is with which technologies we are going to generate this electricity. This is the question. Now, when we look at the numbers, which we do at the IEA, last year, of all the power plants installed in the world, all of them around the world, in all the continents, all the countries, 85% of all power plants installed in the world, new plants, were renewables. Wind, solar, hydropower, 5% nuclear power, and 10% coal plus gas. And why renewables are growing so strongly? Not for environmental reasons, mainly because they are getting cheaper. So this is how the generation looks like, and in the next years, what will happen, we will see. But renewables will definitely have the lion's share. This electricity age also brings some challenges. One of them is, dear colleagues, electricity security. Having strong grids, building transmission lines, distribution lines, and having a very strong grid system, network system in the countries. This is a major challenge in many countries around the world. A second challenge with the age of electricity is the following. Yes, for the electric cars, you don't need oil, or for the solar panels, you don't use gas, but you need to manufacture them, you need copper, you need lithium, you need cobalt and the others, so-called critical minerals. And as it happens, these critical minerals are concentrated on a few number of countries. Their refining, processing is concentrated in one single country, more or less in the world. So there is a concentration of critical minerals mining and manufacturing. This poses a challenge itself. So this is another challenge that comes with the age of electricity. And maybe a final point on the age of electricity is how the governments will design their electricity systems so that the electricity prices are affordable for their households, for their economies. So, therefore, to finish this part, I believe, and the numbers show, we are entering the age of electricity, and maybe a word on Ireland, looking at the Irish energy system, the resources, the economy, geography, I see, for the benefit of the Irish economy, competitiveness of Ireland in the future, and to see the security of the country, I believe the future of Ireland is in electricity and electrification. So this is the direction I would see for the country. So leaving this age of electricity aside, coming to leaving you with the three challenges I see we have in front of us. The first one is the energy security. Dear colleagues, the world is becoming more and more a dangerous place. And energy sector is more and more affected by geopolitical changes more than ever. So therefore, energy security, the traditional energy security challenges, oil and gas, we have seen, you discussed the impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impacts on the European energy markets. But also emerging new energy security risks, such as the electricity security risks, we have seen Spain and Portugal example, such as the critical minerals, concentration of the critical minerals and their manufacturing in certain countries. So energy security is the number one challenge. Number two challenge I see is the climate change. And energy security is at the heart of it. More than 85% of the emissions causing climate change comes from the energy sector. So without fixing the problem in the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to solve our climate change problem. We shouldn't forget, in the middle of so many crises, that the climate is still and becoming even a more serious challenge for all of us. This is the second challenge. Third and the last challenge, and I finish here, I believe you have colleagues who are located in emerging countries, especially Africa. Access to energy, both electricity and cooking. What is cooking? In Africa, for example, 4 out of 5 families prepare their meals in open fire using wood, and women mainly prepare their meals, and the respiratory diseases caused by the toxins coming from this wood burning is one of the top reasons for premature death for women in Africa. So this is another issue, the energy poverty in developing countries. Energy security, climate change, and energy poverty are the two strategic challenges that we are facing today. And I can tell you that all these three challenges to be addressed, you need international collaboration. But I have to be frank, talking with many government leaders, many business leaders around the world, I think the wind is blowing in the wrong direction as far as the international cooperation is concerned. These are difficult times to bring the countries together, to move together to address global challenges, difficult times. But in these difficult times, you need good soldiers, good friends, and I'm thankful that the Irish diplomats, Irish government are always a part of this international effort, international cooperation, and multilateralism. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful address. And I think I would just like to start. We only have time for a couple of questions. We'll try and keep it brief and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. But I want to start off with climate change, global warming is a hugely important issue. Unfortunately, something that we're not discussing widely at the moment when it comes to energy security or global politics. Just talk us through how big a threat that is in relation to energy security now.
Energy security, as I mentioned, oil and gas security we have seen always a major issue during the crisis caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Suddenly in Europe, gas prices skyrocketed, oil prices skyrocketed. So this is a major issue, oil and gas, but also critical minerals. It is especially the fact that the critical minerals are owned and processed in very small number of countries. There's a concentration there is a problem. Routes and the source of supply, diversification. The second one is the predictability. Energy sector investments predictability. You don't change your the policies, frameworks, the investment laws from one day to another, provide a predictable environment. And third is the cooperation. This is the cooperation is very important to find good trade partners, to work with other countries together. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. One country alone have the maintains energy security.
Just on the critical minerals, because we have obviously been hearing about that, well, for decades when it comes to specific places in Africa and so on, but in particular we're talking about Ukraine and Greenland and so on. Do you see this as a new sort of front line, this issue?
Definitely, because I mentioned just a few minutes ago that the electric cars are growing very strongly. I mean, there is no way. It will take some time in some countries, quicker than the others. We will see our streets will be run by the electric cars. And for that, you need critical minerals. Simple. But where are they first mined, where the critical minerals are mined? And second, where they are manufactured. Today, 80% of all critical minerals in the world are manufactured in one single country, which is China. No judgment about China or anything, but it could have been any country. It could be Belgium. It can be anywhere. One country is always a risk. Diversification is very important. It can be a geopolitical event. It can be a natural disaster. It can be a technical failure. So therefore, it is the more suppliers, the better. And this is the reason I believe there is a rush now around the world, increase the number of the countries that produce critical minerals and that refine the critical minerals. We talk about oil all the time, since ages when we talk about energy. And I believe very soon we will talk more and more as much as oil and copper. Because copper is, when you say electricity, electrification age, copper is the main ingredient of our economic life, and the countries who have copper will benefit from that.
And the other thing you mentioned earlier was data centres, which is
Yes.
an issue very important here in Ireland. About 21% of our energy goes on data centres, and obviously it's very important to the economy as well, the tech industry, development of AI. How do you maintain that balance to ensure that Ireland is still at the forefront of that, but also abides by its own rules when it comes to global warming and so on?
So we know that AI is becoming an indispensable part of our economies, our daily lives. Therefore, you need data centers. They are mushrooming around the world. And these tech companies, when they decide which country I go, what I do, they want one thing: electricity. Electricity, electricity. And they want electricity, if possible, affordable prices, 24/7, and clean. So the countries who prepare this electricity infrastructure provide immediate electricity to the data centers are 1 or 2 steps ahead of the other countries. There is a time gap between building a data center, it's about 2 years, and building the grid and it's ready, it's about 7 years on average. The countries that are nimble, quick, to build the power plants, build the grid, or which is already ready, will be in front of the others to attract the tech companies. And Ireland has, of course, a lot of advantages compared to others, but there is a need to increase the electricity supply, increase the grid connections, and make the grid ready for that.
Just final question before I let you go, because I know you have to go. Do you think that Western countries of Europe have learned their lesson in relation to diversification, particularly the lesson around Russia and cheap oil and gas?
Okay, since it is the last question, I can be frank, maybe, up to now. My answer is, I am not 100% sure, because I travel around Europe. I hear and fear that in some corners there are some thoughts, second thoughts, third thoughts. There are some rumors, I don't know if they are true or not, ceasefire, peace, and so on. Should we, again, make use of Russian gas since it is a neighbor? I think it shows me that the lesson is not very well learned, and we will do it as IEA to remind people that if you make a mistake once, it's a mistake, but second times it is not.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the IEA. And there's Anya.
Thank you, well done. Thank you so much for that, Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, and Shona Murray. Now, you'll recall earlier that Taoiseach in his opening remarks talked about next year Ireland taking on presidency of the EU Council in the second half of the year for 6 months, and it will mark the 8th time in the country's history that we have held that position. And obviously, there is a long track record and success story of doing that, most recently in 2013. And here today we have the Minister of State with special responsibility for European affairs, Thomas Byrne, to tell us a little bit about that upcoming EU Council presidency. Please give him a warm round of applause. Thank you, Minister. Nice to see you.
Bala yearv galer is kushmor ahastum ve an sho live gashlan vlog clear egen gogal tav the sho the clor sulagam will clor lawn aguf ta agus is simul agus is anna hasta gwil an desh agam lowert in yo fui gene hawat the role down the naheran ar nukteranacht chorle an aintish Europig if she. Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to join you all today for the Global Ireland Conference. It has been said that diplomacy is not just about, it's been said that diplomacy is about making it through the next century, not just the next media cycle. So I welcome the opportunity that today offers us to take some time to reflect on Ireland's place in the world and to discuss the contribution that we think we can make in the future. In considering the contribution that we make to Europe, I would like to take the opportunity now to look ahead to next year, to the 1st of July 2026. On that date, Ireland will take on the presidency of the Council of the European Union for the 8th time. Our presidency will provide an important opportunity for Ireland to lead and to shape the work of the European Union. Over 6 months, Irish ministers, of course, will chair many dozens of formal meetings of the Council in Brussels and in Luxembourg, and host informal meetings of EU ministers here in Ireland, many of them here in Dublin Castle. We expect to host heads of state and government from across Europe at a meeting of the European political community, and that will be the largest international meeting at that level ever held in Ireland. Overall, we expect to host more than 230 presidency events in Ireland. And in Brussels, bodies, committees and working groups. Ireland will lead the Council's engagement with the European Parliament and work with the Parliament to negotiate and agree new European Union legislation. And we will lead and coordinate the representation of the European Union at several major international conferences where our work will have a truly global impact. All ministers and many hundreds of public servants across government departments and agencies will contribute directly to the delivery of our presidency role. It's fair to say we have a lot of work to do. It will be a big task, but we're determined to do it well, and I have every confidence that we will indeed do it very well. The programme for government has set out very clearly our commitment to resource and to deliver a successful presidency. We will invest the efforts, the resources, and put in the hard work that an effective presidency needs. And the Taoiseach has made it clear that our presidency will be a presidency defined by action. By working with our partners across Europe to deliver on an ambitious presidency agenda for 2026, we will ensure that Ireland's position, influence and reputation in the European Union is maintained and enhanced. Of course, Ireland's presidency will come at a crucial time for the European Union. We will be charged with advancing the Union's agenda against an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. Our European Union and its member states face real and tangible threats, threats that are in many ways more imminent and more severe than at any time since we joined the European Economic Community in 1973. Ireland will steer the agenda of a union which is, rightly, more ambitious in its plans for collective action than ever before. And because the challenges Europe faces today have many complex dimensions, the tools we need to respond to these challenges are in turn more complex. Our agenda for the presidency in 2026 will be a full one and a demanding agenda. The process of defining our priorities for 2026 and the policy programme that we will seek to take forward at Council level, that work is already underway. Our approach will be to focus on those areas where we feel we can make the most effective contribution and where we can advance a positive policy agenda for the European Union and its citizens. It is really clear from all recently conducted opinion polls that most Irish people, the vast majority of Irish people, believe that we have benefited from our European Union membership. But we can't take this for granted, and we won't be complacent. I believe it's imperative that we continue to challenge ourselves in asking how all of us most effectively can communicate Europe. It's incumbent on us to move beyond acronyms and institution speak and find ways to bring home the realities, the benefits of our EU membership to communities right across Ireland. In advance of our European Union presidency, I intend to visit every constituency in Ireland and engage with local communities to communicate what our European Union presidency means and how the European Union works for its citizens. Preparations by the Department are underway for these visits. I will also lead a programme of stakeholder engagement, and that's designed to contribute to the policy programme of our presidency. In Ireland, we know firsthand that the transformative change membership of our European Union can bring. We've always been and will remain a strong supporter of EU enlargement for all candidate countries in the East and in the Western Balkans. We want to see candidate countries seize the increased momentum in the enlargement process, and we are stepping up to help them do that. Recently, I returned from an official visit to Ukraine, during which I visited both Kyiv and Odessa. In truth, it was a humbling experience, but it was also a visit that gave me hope for Ukraine's future as it continues its journey on the EU path. Despite the barbaric efforts launched by Russia on the Ukrainian people and continued by them, the Ukrainian people remain resilient and resolved. Ukraine sees its future as one which is European. And despite the illegal and unjustified invasion by Russia, the work of the Ukrainian government and parliament continues to work towards deeper European integration. Their determination and resilience is inspiring, and we stand with them in the European Union aspirations. And I do recall, though, the Deputy Prime Minister, Olga's definition. She said to me that this work is obviously crucial, central to what their government is about, but it requires huge effort in the face of this illegal and unjustified invasion which continues of Ukraine by Russia. And it's really important to acknowledge the effort that they're making. It's incredible the work that they're doing. Later this year, the government in Ireland here looks forward to opening new embassies in 3 other candidate countries: Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Moldova. And this is a very concrete demonstration of our commitment to EU enlargement. And it is a recognition of the prominence that work on enlargement is likely to have on the agenda of the Council during our presidency. A central aspect of our work during our presidency will relate to the negotiation of the next multi-annual financial framework. In preparing that budgetary framework, the EU will be setting out an ambitious collective agenda for how we want to develop Europe for the next decade. We know that European Union member states want a multi-annual financial framework that reflects the needs of citizens, maintains continuity and predictability, and delivers on the overall ambition of fostering a competitive and secure Europe. And we will play our role in steering negotiations towards that objective. Another major focus of work at European Union level in the time ahead will be on enhancing European competitiveness. With our European partners, we aim to close the innovation gap. We have been engaging intensively on the new Commission's proposals, which build on the analysis in the Letta and Draghi reports. We also consider a properly functioning single market, particularly for services. We consider that to be fundamental to Europe's long-term competitiveness. So cutting red tape, making business simpler, and addressing the regulatory burdens faced by small and medium enterprises, all of that will be critical to delivering prosperity for our citizens. And we expect to make a substantial contribution to this agenda during our presidency. I'm conscious that when Ireland found itself in the Brexit storm, European Union member states farthest away from our own borders, and all those in between, they never wavered in their solidarity for Ireland. At this critical juncture for Europe, the European Union, and as we look ahead to our presidency, Ireland must, of course, demonstrate that same solidarity with our European neighbours in understanding their urgent needs when it comes to security and defence. I know that we can do this in a way that recognises the ambitions and needs of other member states without undermining in any way our own position of military neutrality. Too frequently, investment in our own security and defence capabilities has been presented as a binary choice between whether one is in favour of Ireland remaining militarily neutral or not. I think we need to move away from that false dichotomy. Defending our critical infrastructure is a prime example of where our security and defence priorities must lie at both national and EU level. And we can't stand at the sidelines at this critical juncture. I can assure all of our EU partners that our presidency will accommodate and reconcile the needs, perspectives and priorities of our fellow member states, and that includes the security and defence of the European Union and its member states. So, in 2026, Ireland will be asked to step up and lead major aspects of the Union's work and to ensure that the EU serves the citizens of all its member states, large and small, new and old. During our presidency, we will focus on progressing a shared European agenda. We will have less opportunity than we normally do to speak with our own national voice, and to advocate for our own distinctive national positions and interests. But I think we have a greater opportunity, greater than ever, to advance one of our most fundamental national interests. That is ensuring that we have a European Union that works for all its member states, accommodating their needs, reconciling their perspectives and priorities, and channeling our collective efforts to build for European citizens the future that they deserve. So there's a big challenge ahead for all of us. But Ireland knows how to work with our partners across Europe to deliver a successful and impactful presidency. And in 2026, that's exactly what we will do. Go raibh míle maith agaibh go léir.
Responsibility for European Affairs, Thomas Byrne, for that address. And already it sounds like a very impressive and ambitious itinerary that is going to keep all of you very busy, even busier in the second half of 2026. Now, with that, it is time to refuel, be caffeinated again, take a comfort break, and we ask that you be back in here, plenary session at 11:45. You will be saved by the bell in about 25 minutes. Thank you all. Welcome back, everyone. If I can ask you to take your seats. Thank you. We're very anxious to keep everything running on time, and we are headed into our panel on the economy now. So, if I can ask for your little bit of hush. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Saved by the bell. There we go. As you're taking your seats, I want to ask our team behind us to bring up the QR code for Slido. As I mentioned at the start of this morning, we do want to integrate your audience questions online and in the room here today. So you should see a QR code hopefully coming up on screen in a moment, but also on the live stream. Those of you joining today from Ireland.ie and watching in at all sorts of ungodly hours around the world. For those of you in the room, you can also use Slido, but we will have 2 roving mics. My ask with the Slido is please put your name to it. I would love to use lots of questions coming from the audience, but not anonymously, so put your name to it if you have a great, powerful question to ask. For those of you in the room who'd prefer to use a mic, I will look for show of hands. And again, I'm going to ask for questions, not speeches. And again, do just give your name and organisation. And hopefully, yeah, there we go. We have our QR code. You can see your hashtag. So keep that on hand for the next hour and 15 minutes. As we go into, and hopefully you can still hear me and my mic is picking us up, we're going into our Navigating Uncertainty, Ireland and the Global Economy, and we have an amazing panel for you. So furthest away from me, I have Peter Juhas, Chief Financial Officer of ERCAP. Here, 2 removed from me, we have Dr. Francis Ruan, Chair, National Competitiveness and Productivity Council. Immediately beside me, Paul Sweetman, CEO, American Chamber of Commerce Ireland, and then Orla Ryan, Chief Technical Officer and co-founder at Shorla Oncology. And my hope and intent with this panel is that we can bring you on a little bit of a journey over the next hour, where we're going to start by just taking the pulse when it comes to state of economies and Ireland's role in terms of conversations and brokership and negotiations right now. Then we're going to move into risks and opportunities, and then finally discuss the approach of Ireland in what is a very dynamic, I think it's fair to say, and Taoiseach Simon Harris at one point this morning used the word fragile, in terms of the state of the world right now. But as we all know, the mantra in which we all have to kind of really rally to right now is that idea of change is our only constant, and that we've got to continue to iterate and be agile and be alive to the opportunities, because there is that old adage that says never waste a crisis. In crisis there are always opportunities to be found. And thinking about this panel last night, and I was a political correspondent for many years here in Ireland, and I reported through when it came to our recessionary times. We've all lived through obviously Brexit, COVID, inflation. So even in our very, very recent lifetimes, we've had all of these moments of crises. And you could argue that Ireland was able to navigate them because there was kind of a common ground, there was a town square of rules and order. And it could be argued now in this moment that that town square of rules and world order isn't the same, and therefore it's a little bit more complex for Ireland to negotiate and navigate its way. And that's what I'm hoping our panel over the next hour is going to answer for us, because we've lots of time to tease through it and your questions. And with that, I'm going to go to Paul first. Those of you who heard the Taoiseach Simon Harris this morning will have heard a couple of interesting data points when he talked specifically about the United States, and he talked about how Ireland is now the 6th largest source of foreign direct investment into the US. And the other one that was really interesting was that Irish-owned companies employ more than 200,000 workers across the US. Now, he went on to say, when it came to tariffs this morning, tariffs, he said, and this is Simon Harris, are counterproductive. They drive inflation. They hurt consumers on all sides. We want trade issues to be resolved through substantive, calm, measured dialogue with the United States. Paul, is that something you would agree with 30 days into a 90-day pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs?
Yeah, Absolutely. That has to be 100% the focus at the moment. But if I can start on a really strong positive, just over a week ago, we met members of the House Foreign Relations Committee when they visited in Ireland. And Congressman Mast, who's chair of the committee, a Republican from Florida, we had a Q&A session at the end of the session with members. And the last question asked from a company was, can Ireland be doing anything more in its engagement with the US? And the answer from Congressman Mast, from Chairman Mast, was no. Ireland is in a good place. And I think that is built on the stats and the data points that you've referenced there. A lot of credit goes to the Irish diplomats led by Ambassador Byrne Nason, the IDA and Enterprise Ireland in the US, who've been doing a stellar job. And just to mention the point on Ireland being the 6th largest investor in the United States, I think everybody in this room is very familiar now with that stat, and it's a very positive trend. About a year ago, we were 9th. And again, there's as many people employed by American companies in Ireland as there are Irish companies in the US. What I found really interesting is that there's a success in how we're getting that message through. Edward Walsh, who is the incoming ambassador to Ireland from the US, had his Senate hearing a few days ago. And in his opening remarks, he referenced how strong two-way trade relations were with Ireland and the US, mentioning Ireland being the 6th largest investor. So there are a lot of positives to build on. But to Taoiseach's comments on tariffs and trade barriers, what we have to do is get to the other side of this as quickly as possible. And when you look at all of the reports that are out there, particularly the ESRI Department of Finance report, the major impact, the existential impact of tariffs are all if they become long-term fixtures. So I think we have time to get to the other side. It's all about calmness. It's all about negotiation. And so anything we can do to get to that point where we go back to zero is going to be the objective.
And while we try to get to that other side, though, take the pulse for me, though, of American companies here in Ireland who've invested. They all have 5-year plans. Everybody goes around, work to plan to work. Right now, how much are they struggling with, like, short-term decision-making based on that horizon where they have to have optimism and hope, but right now, here in the moment, they're trying to decide how to make strategic decisions that are best for their organizations?
Yeah, there's a real practical challenge at the moment. If you just simply take a CFO's approach to return on investment on introducing a new product line or a new service or a new project, calculations being made where variables that you insert in there are simply uncertain. You don't know how long they're going to last. I mean, we had tariffs of 20% that were reduced by 50% in a matter of days. So very difficult to make those decisions. So because of that, a lot of activity in that respect is paused. But on the other side, there's a huge ramp up activity in terms of risk scenario and planning. And there are people who are busy doing their day job of managing a site facility and managing a project, and with the additional work of trying to put in place all of these risk scenarios. 99% of them may never be used, but it is taking a lot of mind share. So that's causing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of difficulty. And we also have to look at the human element of this. Within the companies are dealing with tariffs and dealing with trade complications, employees are also looking at the news and have a nervousness about what is going on. So there's that added layer of complexity for companies. So there's a lot of work being done, but it's not necessarily leading to a huge amount of certainty for those companies, which is really causing problems.
Lots in there that we'll come back to. Peter, to bring you in, if the company AirCap is familiar to folks in the audience, it might be because of a certain meeting in the Oval Office between Taoiseach Micheál Martin and US President Donald Trump, where he named 2 organizations, one of which was AirCap because of your purchasing of Boeing aircraft. Can you talk a little bit about whether things have changed for your organization since January, what was the date, 20th, the inauguration of Donald Trump, to that moment around St. Patrick's Week of Taoiseach Micheál Martin mentioning you in the Oval Office, to then the introduction of the 10% tariffs, but then this 90-day pause. Give us a sense of what the world looks like for you at the moment.
Sure, Anya. So I'd say The biggest impact is just the uncertainty of it. I mean, we buy aircraft new from the manufacturers, from Airbus and Boeing. We put them on long-term leases, 12-year leases with airlines, and then we move them around the world. We don't pay the tariffs directly ourselves for the most part. The airlines pay them when they import aircraft in, just as though they were buying them. But right now, there's so much uncertainty about how the tariffs will be applied. So just to give you a small example, when we are outfitting a new plane for a customer, say it's an American customer, and we're ordering seats for them. So recently we were putting seats on a Boeing aircraft and we had to buy them. The seats were in Mexico. So the question was, is there a tariff on those seats? What is the tariff? So if it is a Mexican good that doesn't qualify for the USMCA, it's a 25% tariff. If it qualifies for the USMCA, the free trade agreement there, it is a 0% tariff. But it turns out most of the components of those engines were manufactured in France. So right now, it would be, if it's a French good, it's a 10% tariff, but it could be 20%, as you said, in 60 days. So that just creates a lot of uncertainty. And if you ask the manufacturer and say, well, are these a Mexican good, or are they French, or what are they? That's not something that they've considered before, because aviation has always been a zero tariff industry. And that's just a microcosm of it, but I think it shows you the complications that, certainly from a supply chain standpoint, that companies are going to have to wrestle with.
And when you're looking at so many different variations in tariffs, what does that leave you with in your scenario planning? Do you pause? Do you hedge? Do you go, we're going to take a calculated risk?
Yeah, well, we reported our first quarter earnings last week. So to give you an example, we actually increased our guidance for the year. A lot of companies have pulled it, but basically, in giving it, we said, as we look out today, this is what we expect, and it's looking pretty good. But there's a lot more uncertainty out there. I mean, for sure, because depending on will these tariffs, will they stick? Will they go up again? Is that going to lead to a recession? Obviously, those type of things would affect us. So that's how we've kind of led in terms of messaging, and saying there's a much wider range of outcomes now than there was on January 20th, I think. But it's hard to know. There are so many different paths that it could take.
The background then in all of that, we have President Donald Trump saying that he's been contacted by 100 countries that want to come to the negotiating table. And Francis, back in February, you had written a piece in the Business Post and it was headlined, "If the EU does not pull together, the European single market could well fall apart." When you fast forward to here, present day, even since February, which seems like so long ago in this opening 100 days of the US presidency, do you think Europe is pulling together when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to trade deals?
So I'd like to go back to a point that was made earlier. I think in dealing with the states, I think you made the point, that basically you deal slowly and calmly. You move slowly and steadily, and I think Europe is doing that. But I think the other side of that is that in the context of this global uncertainty, you need to move more quickly at home. So I think the biggest support that the Draghi report has got actually is Donald Trump, because he's raised the issue for Europe of we have to deal with these issues about our internal competitiveness and all of those other related issues. But dealing with the States, Europe is moving very slowly, Ireland is moving very slowly. I think that's right. And actually, I think we learned a lot from Brexit in that, that we saw the slow, steady dealing with Brexit. We were very polite, we were careful, we didn't make any comment on people's decisions to do X, Y, or Z, but we dealt with them. And I think that that's what Europe is seeking to do. And I think the presidencies over the coming years will be important in how that rolls out. It'll be different every 6 months as you go out, but it's going to be very important.
So that thoughtful, intentional approach, be slow, be thoughtful about the outcomes that you want. Right now, Europe, though, is set up very different to the US when it comes to regulations and administrative. And it could be argued that for some startups, and I've been through startups myself, that sometimes it can feel like quite a burden, it can be quite an overhead. Where do you think that sits in the move slow versus maybe where we have to move a little bit faster and more competitively?
I was listening to Mr. Byrne in the previous session, and he made the point about that one of the issues that will be on the agenda for us during our presidency is the issue of regulation and the burden of regulation and red tape. And as I sat there, I said to myself, yes, that's absolutely right. Now, where did the red tape come from? We did it ourselves. So there is a point of necessary reflection, and you've got to ask yourself, what is the institutional feedback that hasn't been taken into account? And in a lot of countries now, people are talking more about public and private sector co-designing policies and co-designing interventions. And I think that reduces, that feedback at the early stage reduces the chances of a regulation that isn't in fact fit for purpose. The difficulty you have is if government works out the regulation, or an agency or a regulator works out the regulation on its own without that consultation. And co-design is not about capture, co-design is about co-design. But if they do it, they don't want to then back off. It's kind of like you're losing position. So I think for Europe, I think this issue of, and it's very much part of Draghi and Letty reports, I think it's really important to face up to what it is we need to do. But as I say, it's the notion of reminding ourselves, we did it to ourselves. So the question is, how do we undo it? And we don't want to get into a situation of saying all regulation is bad, because it's not. Regulation is extremely important, and one of the big strengths in Europe has been the common regulation across EU countries. And for us, the biggest challenge actually with Brexit has been the fact that if they operate to different regulatory rules, it makes our production lines much more challenged on a domestic basis.
Well, regulation, I imagine, is something you're having to think about a lot. You're an EY Entrepreneur of the Year. Congratulations, recently bestowed upon you. But you're in that phase of constantly going through the research, the R&D effort. You have 4 products approved, FDA approval in the United States. So the US is a core market. So a bit like Peter, presumably you're constantly doing a lot of scenario planning now around tariffs and what ifs. What does that look like for you today?
Yeah, so to Peter's point, there's a level of uncertainty, and you're constantly evaluating and planning. What I will point out from our perspective is that relative cost of goods between the US and Ireland and Europe, it is still favourable from our perspective to potentially absorb the tariffs and keep going with it.
So if Trump did come out and put a bigger tariff on pharmaceuticals, you think the math still would say base yourself out of Ireland rather than relocate to the United States?
And it would also be forced upon us, because from a pharmaceutical perspective, it's not an overnight switch to move manufacture to the US. Access to a skilled workforce, a competitive one from, an employee cost perspective. There's a lot of, areas to consider just beyond the tariffs. The US Health Authority, the FDA, have seen a huge cut in their resources, almost 20% as a result of the new administration, and they are the ones that would have to approve these manufacturing site changes. So I think it's something that you constantly try to proactively evaluate, but also have to reactively evaluate as, the communication is made.
And in all of that, as you try to game out tariffs, what of fundraising? Because you have set out a goal of fundraising, I think 45 million, to get you to the next stage, get on the runway and even further along with your launch to market. So describe that climate right now.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we've raised 45 million
45,
to date.
you're on to the next, right.
On to the next one, exactly. So look, investors don't like this level of uncertainty, that's for sure. But that being said, a solid and opportunistic business will be funded. I think, the impact that we will see is timing, impact on valuations. Perhaps if investors are at the end of their fund, they might retain the capital for their current portfolio companies versus taking on new companies. So again, you have to respond accordingly. That being said, I think COVID has helped with a lot of the preparation for that in terms of resiliency and, having the access to Enterprise Ireland, for example, and having an anchor and support is really important for companies on their funding journey.
Okay, great. Francis, you mentioned Brexit, and we've talked a lot about US here as this opening salvo for the conversation, but what of other opportunities and markets? And we can see the UK seems to be hitting a little bit of a reset with its European relations and its recent summit. What are the other learnings maybe from Brexit, but how should we be thinking about other opportunities, whether it's with Canada, Asia, the Mercosur deal and beyond?
I mean, I think, most of these deals they're going to be EU deals that we're going to be doing, but they'll be based, the actual trade that takes place and what happens will depend on business relationships. So I think it's very important for us that the EU is very active in this area. And we all know the EU moves very, very slowly. I think it might go just like a little bit of a warmer up, or not crazy speed and not reactionary, but very proactively saying where do we need to be. It was mentioned in earlier sessions this morning. I mean, diversification is absolutely crucial. in terms of dealing with global issues and in particular global uncertainty. So the more diverse the EU sets of trade deals are, the better. I mean, obviously the US has been just a huge leader for all of us, able to absorb a huge amount of product that people want to bring to market, or indeed of services that people want to bring to market. And that doesn't look as if that's going to happen at the same rate of speed. So I think we need to look elsewhere. And I think it's a little bit tougher. You know, it's a very large group of countries to be doing a trade agreement for. And that requires holding together, that we see the bigger picture. But at the same time, it's very valuable to us that we're part of a big group of 27 countries when it comes to doing trade deals. I remember being in China after Brexit, and somebody said, I was asking sort of, could the China, this was 2017, could they see any benefits to Britain being on its own to negotiate trade deals with? And they said, well, actually no, because it's so small, it's not really a huge market for us. He said, it could be a bit easier because they'll have less interest groups to deal with. So there's always a trade-off. The bigger you are, the bigger the market for the deal, but at the same time you have to balance. So when I said earlier on about Europe holding together, and you mentioned COVID, I think COVID was a very good learning period for Europe. I think unlike the financial crisis where it was not good, I think it has become much better in the period since then.
Paul Francis mentioned speed a number of times there, and I think she's been very diplomatic and, you know, calling it slow and thoughtful and intentional. What say you of the European approach at the moment to negotiations and beyond?
I fully agree with Francis from the perspective that we now have a huge opportunity to tackle challenges that we know we've had for some time. If I can give a bit of insight into some of our own work, we launched our strategy Competing for the Future back at our Thanksgiving lunch in November 2024. We actually had that strategy written in the early days of November before the US election had taken place. So we had an opportunity to change it, and we didn't. Not one word of it changed, for the very reason that it was entirely focused on competitiveness. And when the dust settles on all of the things that we're facing now, it will be countries and regions that are most competitive that are going to win in investment. And we already know what we need to do in those spaces, both at a national level and at a European level. And there's a huge opportunity here in the sense that when you look at what a lot of what the US is saying in terms of what they need Europe to do, we have the blueprints there in the Draghi report, in the competitiveness compass, and it's a matter now of execution. And I think if we can show that trend of delivery, we don't necessarily have to fix everything straight away, but if we can show movement, I think that's really going to aid negotiations between the EU and the US. But more importantly, it's going to make Europe incredibly competitive, both for homegrown businesses and for businesses who want to invest here from abroad.
Peter, Paul is very optimistic and positive there in terms of how EU can continue to improve in competitiveness. But if you're a business sitting in the audience or watching, listening online, that may be so, but in your parallel swim track, you have to go, but we got to live with the risks and therefore really come to terms with our mitigations, even though the landscape maybe ahead is positive and there's room for optimism. You've had to think a lot about headline risks. Can you talk a little bit about practical things that you did, but just what advice you would give to other Irish companies in this moment?
Sure. So for our industry, COVID was existential, right? I mean, you had 85, 90% of the planes on the ground globally in April of 2020. And so, you know, our response to that was we didn't know how long it would last. Nobody did. And so we tried to get as much liquidity as we could and essentially push off to the extent that we could any obligations. So we had aircraft deliveries that were coming over that year and the following year. And it was obviously a terrible time to be leasing aircraft. And so we pushed those out. You know, we negotiated with the manufacturers and pushed those out as best we could. And that was a big benefit. And, you know, in retrospect, I'd say the recovery from COVID came faster than you know, we thought at the beginning. But you didn't know, right? And I think, you know, assuring investors, we're a public company, so ensuring the rating agencies and others that, look, we don't know how long this is going to last, but our plan is to get through it. That was very helpful. And ultimately, it did allow us to do we did a large acquisition. We bought GE's aircraft leasing business in November of 2021. We announced it in March. And it's kind of an odd time to be buying an aviation business, but I think the fact that we were in a very strong position enabled us to do that. If we hadn't, built that resiliency into our balance sheet, we would never have been able to do that deal.
Is that a route, though, that's less certain, a little bit for Orla, where fundraising, investors are nervous right now about where to write checks for scale-ups or start-ups, but mergers and acquisitions are critical for the whole ecosystem, for you to grow, but for an Irish company maybe to have its exit, have its day where they can merge in with a company such as yours. What's that landscape like right now when it comes to M&As?
I think a lot of things are on hold. So there was a lot, certainly coming out of the election in the US, there was a lot of optimism because people thought Trump is going to deregulate, all of these antitrust issues are going to be reduced, and you'll be able to do deals. And now, just with the tariff situation being so uncertain, and I guess the economic situation coming out of that, you're seeing a lot more of things on hold. In our industry, but in almost everybody. I was in New York yesterday and talking to the banks there, pretty much across the board, they're seeing that.
And do you get a sense of what the milestone is that they're looking for to maybe kick back into action, when they think about, right, we're on hold, we're on pause? Is it that this 90-day pause will come to an end and there's some certainty on tariffs, or do you think it's much longer than that, beyond maybe a 4-term cycle of a US president?
So I'd say most people there are thinking that there will be resolution on the tariff side. It may not be zero. I don't think people in general, in the US anyway, think that it will be zero. It may be a 10% one with exemptions in different areas. Because I think fundamentally Trump likes tariffs. If there's anything else that's been consistent, he actually likes them, irrespective of whether they make any economic sense or not. He likes them. He announced the other day, he floated 100% tariffs on the film industry, which is one of the biggest US surplus areas around. So it doesn't make any economic sense, but I think if you did have, even if there were certainty on that, if people said, okay, we're going to get to a 10% level, maybe it's somewhat higher on China or not, then at least people know what the playing field looks like.
Donald Trump, as we say, thinks a lot about tariffs. You, Francis, have to think a lot about state aid and its role when it comes to how it maybe impacts our economic model and our reputation as an attractive location for FDI, foreign direct investment. What's your current assessment?
So I think the letter report made it very clear that the European single market and the issues related to that were to go through, were to be maintained. And for a small country, that really matters. So our alliances throughout Europe are really the smaller countries who gain most from the single market. And regulation is a really important part of that, and state aid is also an important part of it. Now, one thing that's in the Draghi report, I remember somebody saying to me that yes, the letter report is very easy for Ireland. We can sign up to it, virtually everything. The Draghi report is a little bit more difficult because, in some sense, and it goes back to kind of the mid-2010s, there has been a more relaxed attitude to certain types of state aid back since that period, and that's moved even further forward now. So if you take it, why Europe? The story with the state aid issue is a little bit like the non-tariff barriers or the other regulations that countries were put in to reduce trade. So the state aid being used in Europe before the single market was under a certain amount of control, but it was very much around countries trying to shore up older industries to keep them going and using state aid in order to do that. Now, we were very different in that regard because I did some research on this many years ago. We were actually using state aid to grow to grow companies and grow sectors that we felt were really important. So it wasn't that shoring up piece. Now, where Draghi report has gone on this is these IPCEI projects, these large European projects that are seen as being strategically important. Now, they're going to allow higher levels of support, probably centrally from Europe, but also from individual countries. And what really matters there is that they are genuinely strategic, big European projects, and that smaller countries like Ireland are open to be able to be involved in them. We've been involved in one so far. There'll be certain ones which won't make sense for us to be involved in, but then we need to make sure that the IDA is set up in such a way that it can actually co-finance those. So I think one of the challenges for us is the way we do budgeting and the way we think about these things. Because if you sign up to one of these really, really very big projects, you're going to have to commit to money several years out. And our budgetary strategy tends to be rather more annual rather than, and we're not talking about 3 year here, but about 5 year or longer. So I think there's a job of work to be done here to allow us to be able to engage in these projects. So if you look at something like the pharmaceutical industry and the whole area around Skiddy, that in today's terms is a monstrous, huge investment. But it happened gradually over the years. So IDA was able to support whatever was needed in relation to that as it grew. But some of these bigger projects now are kind of off scale. So there's a danger for all small countries in Europe that these might consolidate into being in the bigger countries. And one of the things that has been done recently is used to have at least 2 countries involved in them. They've now widened that to 4. But what really matters is that the small countries make sure their voice is heard, so that this does not become a concentration in just the 2 big countries.
And what more do you think Ireland needs to do? You'll have heard the Taoiseach this morning talking about, Ireland's soft power, that we shouldn't be passive, we need to go out, front foot on proactively with momentum. So when it comes to further integration of the single market, maintenance of that level playing field, what more does Ireland need to do on that European stage?
I think a lot of it is around the soft power. A lot of it is around our going into situations where we've the research done and we know what we want. We've got strategic clarity, and that strategic clarity is based on evidence. And one of the things we've seen over the last period is government doing more and more to make sure that it has the evidence to make a lot of the decisions that it does. But going into soft power on the relationship, on the basis of just relationships without some hard evidence to support why we're doing that, I think it's also, if we're going to be credible in Europe, for example, in pushing for reductions in certain kinds of red tape, in other regulations, I think we need to have a consistent strategy. So we need to be very clear. Now, I think our agencies and the country are pretty good on that, but it'd be really important to cross-check it. It may be the case that the President of the United States can say something on a Monday and something on a Tuesday and something on a Wednesday, and they don't necessarily totally cohere. But I think within the European model, it's really important that Ireland has a consistent set of strategic positions, which means that people take us seriously as a partner and listen to us carefully.
And on that consistent strategic approaches, Paul, do you think we're consistent now as a country when it comes to our tax base, when it comes to corporation tax? And how do you think we're perceived then by companies considering Ireland on the strength maybe of what we have to offer when it comes to taxation?
I think when it comes to tax policy, wherever you are in the world, what companies are looking for are certainty in the short, right out to the long term. And I think the BEPS process has allowed us to do that. There may still be changes ahead. You could look at the US saying we may change our corporate tax rate. That perhaps might be more challenging. I mean, we've seen movements quite quickly on tariffs, but tax changes in the US require congressional changes and congressional support, and is there the fiscal space within the US to make those tax changes? But a lot of that will be moving around us, as well as the OECD process and where we land on that. But there are things that we can look at here within Ireland and see how competitive in tax structures we are. So let's take our R&D tax credit, for an example. We are doing what's called a routine review of that right now, but actually it's perfect timing because it can be a space where we can look at, okay, what are our offerings in this space? How do we compare to other jurisdictions? And the piece for me that's crucial about the R&D tax credit, as an example, is that it's all focused on talent. And when you go to companies that are based here, the reason they are here is talent. We conducted a survey recently of our members, and they all had a very positive view of their investment in Ireland. When we asked them why, it was because of the talent that's here. And the talent is in twofold. One is that it's qualifications on paper, whether it's through an apprenticeship or a third-level qualification, but also it's that pedigree of delivery, that understanding of what needs to be done. And when I go around and visit sites, what really strikes me is the level of innovation that's being led from Ireland. And sometimes that innovation starts small and grows over time, and these locations then become strategic innovation centres for a company. And it's all based on talent, innovating, working in that R&D space. So when I think of tax, I think of where can we be clever to support the talent that's here.
Do you think, though, there is still risk? Like we're going to go into a budget estimates period now here in Ireland, and inevitably there will be analysis of so-called over-reliance on corporation tax. And you look at something like foreign-owned multinationals account for 84% of corporation tax. US multinationals account for 75% of all corporation tax revenue. Is there just risk there? Like you're saying it's talent, and your surveys bear that out, that's why they're coming to Ireland. But corporation tax must be a consideration, and therefore there is risk associated for governments trying to do the multi-annual planning that Francis is talking about rather than this year-to-year cycle.
Yeah, so I think when it comes again to risk and tax, it's always something that needs to be examined. But when I look about what we do as an organisation, we advocate on behalf of US companies that are here to make sure that this is the most competitive place for them to grow. And there's a multitude of issues that they ask us to work on. One of them may be tax policy, but they also look at things like infrastructure, scientific infrastructure, basic infrastructure, and talent capabilities. And when we look again at our strategy, what we have mentioned most is what can we do to support those areas. So you look at our basic infrastructure, we're 38th in the world. To me, that's more concerning. When we look at our cost competitiveness, we're 46th. And then scientific infrastructure, and you could read part of R&D in there, we're 20th. Now, despite the fact that we're 4th overall most competitive in the world, they're what concern me, and they're what we call out and have been urged to call out within our strategy.
Orla, when you listen to that rankings there from Paul, like how much of that is relevant to you in terms of like thinking about talent, competitiveness, but the tax base, corporation tax as well?
No, totally relevant. And speaking to the R&D tax credits, we have been fortunate to benefit from those. And I think that's where we should be focusing energy and emphasis on. The funding cuts in the US from an NIH perspective. Is there an opportunity to co-fund, co-collaborate, across, Atlantic collaboration to foster the future innovation and build a level of resilience within that? Access to talent competitively is another, benefit of, staying in Ireland versus the US. We employ both in Ireland and the US, and it's very obvious, from that perspective. So I think there are definitely areas that should be focused on and should be funded.
And do you find appetite from companies abroad to collaborate rather than compete and come in and actually kind of the sum of all of you doing something really innovative, creative, rather than repeating the wheel maybe sometimes?
And we've seen that on the European level, and initiatives like Horizon 2020 and all of those where, there's cross-country collaboration. So I think there's a model there that can be worked on to expand.
Francis, do you want to come in there on the whole subject of corporation tax?
Yeah, but just to link back, I mean, we as a small country, we like rules-based environment. Why? Because we're not in a negotiating position, because we're so small. So we're part of a bigger group within Europe, but even within Europe, within the global position, the more rules-based the system is the better. So things like BEPS that you mentioned is really, really very important, that the OECD managed to progress that development of how to deal with the changing model, if you like, of corporation tax, because corporation tax was not designed for a globalized world, so it has had to evolve. But I want to come back particularly to the issue of R&D tax credits. I think it's absolutely right as one of the important things to look at. And I would have written about this many, many decades ago. We, for a long time, had very high-tech sectors, but we did not have high-tech activities in those firms, in those sectors. That gradually began to change over the 90s. And we've invested in the talent and the R&D tax credits that came, the setting up of Science Foundation Ireland, and then the R&D tax credits that came in the early 2000s was a really important part of that. So you were deepening the R&D content. And we work on that, our method of giving those tax credits is based on what's called the Frascati manual, which was an OECD manual developed decades and decades ago. But it was developed in a way that suits the multinationals who've got scale big enough to start at the very R and then go to the D and then the innovation and then the sales. For smaller companies, it's more difficult. So for Irish-owned companies, there's very few of them that they will start at the R unless the R takes place in one of the universities that they're working with, because the scale is relatively small. So we need a broader concept of an R&D tax credit for for the indigenous companies. So there's a thing called the Oslo Manual, which is a much wider definition. Department of Finance doesn't like it, and I can understand their feelings and emotions on it, because obviously it would broaden the potential offsets. But something needs to be done, I think, for the R&D. I'm not saying there shouldn't be stuff done for the FDI companies, but I think for the indigenous companies to really harness that ability to innovate, which means you innovate and work back from D to R rather than go RDI, is really important. I don't know whether it's affecting you, but it seems to me it's one of those changes from the point of view of our exports that we need to develop.
So I'm going to move us on now a little bit to approach and problem solving and more on the opportunities. For our audience, and we might pull up the QR code for anyone who missed it on the live stream or here in the room. I am going to come to audience questions shortly as I come out of this approach piece. So do have some questions in, keep them coming, and we're going to have roving mics. But Peter, as you listen to all of that and think about the interests of Irish businesses, American businesses, and in the audience we know we've got incredible diplomats. How do you think Ireland needs to go about representing the voice, the needs, whether it is R&D credits, it is collaborations, maybe as Orla has talked about, competitiveness has been mentioned again and again. What would you like and what would you ask of those who are in a lot of these rooms where negotiations and influence and soft power is happening?
Yeah, so I think Ireland has been very effective. I mean, the diplomatic corps has been amazing in terms of what punching above its weight, right, globally. And we see that, and we've gotten help in many different countries. I mean, our business is global. We're in about 90 countries around the world, whether it's trying to extract aircraft from Ukraine during the Ukraine war, to various, after the Russian sanctions and they stole our aircraft, to various things, and helping with in Brussels with the EU. So that has all been very helpful, and I think the certainty that Ireland has been able to project has been, that's clearly very valuable, particularly in long cycle businesses where you can rely on that. There are challenges, though, particularly on the tax side, and Paul mentioned it a little bit, but there are a couple of bills in front of the U.S. Congress now that would essentially eviscerate the double taxation agreement between the U.S. and Ireland. And really that's around the undertax payment rule, which is part of Pillar 2, BEPS Pillar 2. And essentially the U.S. just doesn't want foreign countries taxing, if the effective tax rate is below 15%. They don't want other countries taking that. That's a critical part of Pillar 2. And so I think that right now there's a safe harbor. The EU has agreed a safe harbor for 2025 where that doesn't apply. But if those bills are passed, then that could have meaningful effects. I mean, for an example, that would mean a 30 to 35% withholding tax on any payments out of the U.S. to Ireland for most businesses. So when you think of all the Irish businesses that are employing people in the U.S., that's a huge cost to pay.
Orla, similar for you, have you felt the effects of Irish diplomacy in recent months? And again, how would you like to see the voice of a company such as yours represented in offices, boardrooms around the world?
Absolutely, and I would say from the start of the company, not just in recent times, the US was our initial and main target market, and leveraging Enterprise Ireland and the embassy in the US, along with AmCham, has been so beneficial. I think as we look forward and we talk about diversification, I think it's that support with market access into new markets that can be accelerated through support such as Enterprise Ireland that will really help companies going forward.
Because presumably you have a plan A, which is US market, like that's your key player, but you must, I'm sure, be working on a plan B, C, D, E, F. And is that clear in your own mind now, when you might have to trigger a plan B, a plan D, what those milestones are going to be, and what those markets therefore are, and how you think about ranking them?
Of course, and I think it's times like this that accelerate your plan B or your plan C, so hence why it's so important to have them. I think market feasibility is crucial to ensure that when you do access the market, you know your market and you know the opportunity that lies there, so that you're investing in the right markets. And that's how we approached the US initially and how we'll approach future markets. So it is something that you do have to plan, an annual scenario plan, and then action accordingly, notwithstanding, the flux that will go with it.
Yeah. Paul, we often say here in Ireland, all politics is local. Do you think the same applies when it comes to United States, particularly over the next 60 days as we enter into the last miles of this pause on tariffs and what lies ahead? Like, is it important for Irish representatives to be thinking about state by state, like city-specific examples, matching companies, case studies to something that is very meaningful on the US side?
Yes, certainly. I mean, first thing I'd say is that the work at the national level between Ireland and DC has been phenomenal. And when you think of the engagements that have taken place between the Taoiseach and Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Rowlands and Minister Hayden, I mean, it's exceptional that Ireland is getting into these rooms at a time of such flux, and there's been great leverage of the social, cultural and economic ties in order to build those relationships. With that said, it is also crucial to operate at a state-to-state level. When we mentioned being the 6th largest investor in the US, in some US states, an Irish company is the largest employer. And for the governors of those states and for the Congress representatives in those states, employment is a KPI for them with regard to how they're going to perform in future elections. Not a sole KPI, but obviously a very important one. What I think is remarkable as well is that Ireland already has this approach within the US. I think of Select USA, it's on my mind because I'm going over there this weekend. And for those unfamiliar with Select USA, it's their equivalent of the IDA, and they hold a major summit every year, and delegations come from across the world to visit. They bring companies with them to engage at the state level of what are the offerings for the state, what are they looking for in terms of supports, in terms of talent and so forth. And it's kind of like a one-stop shop. When Ireland brought a delegation last year, it was the 3rd largest delegation from Europe in terms of companies, and we're looking to emulate that again this year. And that really is noticed at the state level and also within the national administration. So doubling down on that, it's not like we actually have to start anything new here. I think we are very effective. It's a large country, but we're doing a lot of good work in that space.
Do you think the in-person, the handshakes, building that chemistry, being in the rooms, eyeballing people, more important than ever than just relying on remote video calls?
I think so. I mean, I'd really say it at any point, but in the age of digital, proximity still matters. And engaging with people one-to-one, you will get the nuances of what's coming down the tracks. I think what's challenging for people right now is that they're trying to see around corners. And the best way is to build up relationships. I mean, there may be a phone call that I have with a connection, and it's a 5-minute phone call that's critically important, but that relationship was built up over the number of years. And we're going to see more and more of those opportunities coming up. So engaging with people on the ground, both for companies and for our diplomatic corps, our state agencies, is going to be critical. But we have more than foundations. We have incredibly strong ties already. And we've seen that manifest itself in the meetings at the DC level. So I think we just need to double down.
And when we're in those meetings, it sounds like you feel like there's a strong story on talent, but I'm curious to get your take on, are we doing enough to think about the jobs of the future, the job titles that don't even exist today, given ChatGPT, the evolution of AI that is moving so quickly. So there's talent, but keeping pace. But then we constantly know our headlines here in Ireland around homelessness crisis, housing crisis, investment needed in public infrastructure, invested needed, in our water infrastructure. Where do you think we're at today? Where do we need to get to if we're going to continue the momentum of the investment we have seen in the past?
Yeah, so I think a positive and a negative on that, and kind of they revolve around the same place. When we were in New York, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco for our St. Patrick's Week or St. Patrick's Season activities, we went in and met a number of companies at a senior level, some at boardroom level, and we were armed with, here are Ireland's competitive advantages and ready just to commend those who've made investments in Ireland about, their strong choices. We didn't get to those competitive advantages from our side because they were spoken to us. All of the companies recognize the strength and the value of investing in Ireland. And to your point about the jobs of the future, a lot of organisations recognise the innovation that's taking place. Ireland had its first Masters in Artificial Intelligence back in 2018, and it was a first in Europe because it was company-led. But it's a double-edged sword as well, because companies are looking closely at the great strengths of Ireland, but they will also read the headlines of what's happening in Ireland, and they know the challenges that we're facing. What I would say to that, though, is that many jurisdictions are facing similar challenges. So it's not about trying to avoid or not speak about them. We need to confront them head on and show the progress. If we have a 5-year plan, it's built up of 61-month goals. If we can show to the boardrooms that this is the direction of travel, this is the trend, that's where the confidence comes from investment. We don't necessarily have to get rapidly to the end goal. So companies will notice that there are challenges, but what they will notice more is whether we're making progress on those or not.
Okay. And Francis, to that, you're across the whole of government action plan on competitiveness and productivity. Like Paul, do you think there's some things that are good, some things not so good? Where do we have to work harder?
So one of the kind of good things from a sort of signal for Ireland is we do well on the IMD competitiveness indices, and we have done over a long period of time. But actually, if you look at it closely, we've done very poorly on the infrastructure pillar for a long time. Because things slowed down with the crash, the global financial crash, that wasn't quite serious. It began to build up, and we simply didn't build up in time. And the Competitiveness and Productivity Council's report talked to this issue about infrastructure over the last 5 years, and it's been increasing at every stage. And a big issue for us has been the relatively slow response to some of those issues. And some of them are, where private sector investment was required, whether it's investment in office buildings in Dublin or it's company investments in the various different industries and sectors where we're strong. That's all happened. So it's not as if this can't happen. But what has actually been the problem has been public infrastructure investment has been too slow. And now we're in a situation where I think what's really important is that we prioritize what it is we're doing. What really matters? And there's a kind of an Irish thing. Politically, people have to prioritize everything, but actually, when it comes down to it, you need to prioritize what matters. So I think there was something in one of the newspapers over the weekend about houses that are built but can't get an electricity connection. Now, ultimately, the public sector is responsible for the water, the electricity, the roads, etc. So they absolutely need to make sure that's done. We've finally got a new planning framework that's updated, but we really need action in that area. And housing obviously comes out of that, but ultimately, if you don't have electricity and you don't have water, you don't have housing. And it requires private building to do many of those other jobs. But the state must be more agile and be faster at making those decisions.
And when you go to root causes there in terms of the slowness or sometimes that joined up thinking, so the article you referred to at the weekend, this idea was on the front page of the Irish Daily Mail that, as an example, that the data centres are using up a lot of that electricity grid and that sometimes, therefore, new houses aren't getting prioritised. So that was the particular example there. What is it that's happening there? Is it that sometimes we need to be better in terms of our prioritisation? Is it creating the sense of urgency? Is it creating more collaboration across governments and interagencies? Like, when you look at what are the things that need to change for us to move faster and get that collaboration, what's at the heart of it?
Well, first of all, let's agree, these are hard subjects. A lot of countries have difficulty with planning, with execution. The UK has it with roads, with housing. A lot of continental Europe has different issues. So this isn't, it's not that it's not a simple problem and there's a silver bullet. It's actually a set of systemic policies that are required and connections that are joined up. So if you want to go back to root cause, you have to actually go back to 1977, because that was when we reduced the direct incomes going to local government. And local government are absolutely crucial in the link with central government in the delivery of infrastructure, particularly housing outside the, well, anywhere actually. And that's a weak link, and we need to be recognising that's a weak link. Now, how do we manage that weak link? What do we need to do more? And again, I would say much more cooperation between central and local government in terms of the planning of those things is required. But it's also, as I say, it's around, around decisions that are politically sometimes very difficult to make. But they have to be made, because in the absence of them being made, you may end up having the electricity over there, the water over there, and people wanting the housing here. Yes. So it doesn't really make any sense not to join it up. I think, like everybody else, the government's decision to try to get a quote-unquote housing czar seemed like a good idea. I think it's unfortunate that it doesn't seem to be able to be moving forward in the way that was hoped. But these are intrinsically hard and difficult issues, and let's not fool ourselves around that, because our local authorities have not had the investment that they needed to be the engines of growth outside, particularly outside the Dublin area, and that is a key thing that's required to be done.
Okay. Keep your questions coming. There's loads of them rolling up here in front of me that I'm going to come to shortly. Orla, on that point there about just hard decisions, being really clear about prioritisation, trying to kind of bring things out of silos and into a more collaborative framework, and then just moving with a sense of urgency. Is there anything that strikes you that you'd like to see more momentum on?
I think support for growth. I think from our experience, starting a company in Ireland is well funded and well resourced, but as we scale, and I know it is a focus of Enterprise Ireland, but if we want that global ambition, if we want to diversify, we need the supports there to do that, especially in times of uncertainty where one market may not be as attractive as it originally was thought to be, or that there's a bit of more risk associated with it. So speaking in the startup to scale up perspective, I think that would be something we would support and encourage.
And Peter, going back to Paul's point about talent and the fact that we seem to have some kind of first mover advantage back in 2018 when it came to AI, what would you like to see happening here in Ireland to make sure we're very competitive when it comes to international talent, and that continues to be a key calling card for companies to come and invest here?
Yeah, I mean, we've brought a lot of people in from abroad, myself included. I think one of the things that we found is housing and things like that obviously across the board affect people. But the hard part in retaining people has been around education. And when people get up to their kids get up to senior school level, a lot of them, we've found, have tended to go back. And I think that's partly because you don't have a lot of international baccalaureate programs. A lot of them would prefer to go to university in their own country or home countries. And so I think that building that up would be helpful in terms of some more international schools, because you would retain the people more. And I think just investment in third level education, if you look at where things have slipped over the last 10, 20 years, right? I think it's evident in looking at the rankings there. Rankings aren't everything, but I think it does show you, what has been happening.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I'm going to go through now a rapid fire round of questions, because we have lots of brilliant questions from our audience. Keep them coming. Francis, I might get you to lead out on this one, but everyone jump in. And Cathal McSweeney asks, what are the top 3 things in our control that are negatively affecting our competitiveness, and how to tackle them?
Top 3 things. I think planning has been a huge issue. I think we're now finally getting on top of it, but I'm very conscious that in recruiting people for Board Planola, they had to take planners from all around the country. So that might slow something down at one end and not be the other. So I think the design of how we manage planning is one thing that we haven't done. I think I'm just thinking of the uncertainty in relation to our. A lot of things we can't control. I think the planning thing we can control. I think government needs to do something to release the constraint on investment in crucial infrastructure, which is, particularly at the moment, is electricity and water. And if we're being very, very constrained by the budget, we need to find a way to sort that one out, because the speed at which we can do things is constrained. Any construction companies that I've spoken to have all said, if there are the projects, if the things have been worked out well, we can get the workers. So as an economist, you'd be saying, is there going to be a supply constraint? And they feel no. I think the other issue that has changed in the recent past that I think will help with the housing, to some extent at least, is that modern methods of construction, which Enterprise Ireland and the Department of Enterprise were very strong in promoting. Bringing those in is really crucial to deal with something, the housing issue, which I think is reputationally, it's really very, very problematic for us. I think for those to be done, it's important then that the building regulations match them, because sometimes we can have a kind of, we're moving on this, but this area here isn't quite the same. So we want to be able to build at scale in a way that will be cost effective and produce houses that people can control.
Great. Anyone want to come in on any of that, Paul?
The only piece I'll mention, rather than picking a top three, is that I'm pretty sure we know what we need to do. It's a matter of execution, and that's the piece that we need to push now. Although there are really positive signs here. Minister Chambers has a new unit being established in Deeper. These are doing things in a different way, and there's hope there that I think we'll get the execution element right. But we need to move at pace, and we'll see results over summer, whether that's working or not.
Okay, great. I'm going to take another audience question. Brian asks, how do we balance the Taoiseach's exhortation not to whisper on our values and defend our vital economic interests? And just, if you didn't hear the Taoiseach earlier, he talked about this values test, that if you said something in 2024 in terms of what Ireland stood up for, you should still be comfortable saying it in 2025 and beyond. So that's just the background there. So how do you balance not to whisper on our values, but yet defend vital economic interests? Anyone want to lead out on that? Well, I'll let you continue to think on it.
Yeah, I'll take it. I mean, I think it's a very strong statement, and I think Ireland is showing form in this space. I mean, we've seen Ireland take a position that's very much on one side or the other on particular issues, and I'm being quite clear about that. And what's interesting is that while still doing that, well, we're not saying we necessarily agree with everything that's going on around the world, we're still getting in the rooms to have discussions. And I think that's the crucial point, is that once we continue to talk, it doesn't mean that it's inextricably linked to absolutely having to agree, but the discussion are still taking place, despite the fact that we may be taking black and white positions on things.
Great.
I just say, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, being able to engage in what I call respectful discussions is the most important thing. And I think we're very good at that. And I think our diplomats are very good at that. But I think as people we are. And it's important to learn how to have that discourse. As I said, after Brexit, we could see difficulties that had been created, but we didn't call them out. We let people deal with their own issues, and we had our own values. We said, how do we get on with this? So I would agree completely with that approach.
Okay, great. Okay, on to another question. Let's say, Eva in Maynooth University, thank you for the question, Eva. Do you have a view on the role of universities in helping us navigate through these uncertain times and build a strong future for Ireland? Role of universities, anyone?
I can just on that. I mean, I think knowledge is becoming more specific. It's a more complex world all the time. One of the criticisms that I would have had of our civil service is that we haven't actually modernized in a way that has taken that complexity of the modern world into account. We don't have enough specialist skills within the public sector. I think that slows down decision making, going back to your earlier point about execution. So I think finding people within the universities with whom both government and companies can connect with. I think the company work happens a lot through the grant system. I think that's been extremely successful. But I think for government to find, and not all academics are good at or would want to engage with government, but getting them to engage where relevant. So we now have a chief scientific advisor. We're decades after everybody else in having a very active one. We need to set up a mechanism of having that person supported by other academics within the system. But I think there's a lot of ways in which it can be done. And the more people within the civil service and within the public service who see the value of that, the faster it'll happen. But I think that's a key way in which they could be promoted.
And just one thing I'd mention on that as well is the university ecosystem, and I'll focus on US and Ireland here, it's an incredibly powerful channel for collaboration. And just to give an example, something that, again, may not be hugely well known, but we now have over 20 trade commissions between a US state and Ireland. And there are commissioners appointed to those trade commissions by the governor of that state. And many of those commissioners are from US universities. And their focus is how do they collaborate with Ireland through that commission. Now, it's economic as well and business, etc. But the fact that you can engage at that level, again, going back to the state-to-state engagement, it's going to be a really powerful channel. We have it already, and again, it's just looking for those opportunities to bolster it and do more.
Okay, great. Okay, staying with this theme on education, Una asks, linking to earlier talks on energy and climate, how does the panel feel we are faring in training youth to have the skills needed for the green economy?
I mean, I can't really say very much. I've no expertise specifically in this, but I think that's been one of the really good things, is that the universities, by comparison with the past, have responded more quickly to when these new programs and new research things are needed, and I think that's really a positive thing. And it's important then that those voices feed through the whole system, and that they make sense to business that's in the country, make sense to government in relation to policy, and gives universities some certainty about what's happening. I mean, one of the things we've talked about a lot today is global uncertainty. It's important if universities are going to invest in something that they know there's a line of funding, that they can feel they can make that predictability in terms of what resources they put into place. I think that's a crucial one in those areas.
Orla, you're nodding your head in agreement. Okay, shout if anyone wants to add anything in there. Barbara says there's a lot of expectation in business circles in Sweden that this is quote unquote Europe's moment, economically and geopolitically. Any comments from our panel? Just that Europe can rise to meet the moment.
Well, I think, sure. I do think that, what you're seeing coming out of the U.S., I mean, it's unprecedented, right? And it's really a sea change. And maybe after Donald Trump, is there another administration that changes tack? Maybe. But it's hard you can't count on that, right? And I think that's the thing that's different now. One time maybe a fluke, but you elect someone like that twice, it's just uncertain. And so the fact that the U.S. can't be relied on in the same way as it was before, I mean, that obviously presents a lot of challenges, but also opportunities. Even going back to some of these things like education, where you think, okay, we've all seen the news about the U.S. education system and some of the things that are going on there, the health system in terms of the FDA. I mean, those are opportunities to attract people to Ireland, to other places in Europe, to study, to work. So I think it is something that can be taken advantage of. It's not a pure negative.
Okay, great.
Just come in on that. I mean, I think we're very lucky in having had the work that was done by Mario Draghi in the last year, because it gives actually Europe a lot of frameworks in which to operate and think about the key 10 priorities that Europe has in relation to that. And we can kind of, I suppose, understand it as a small country next to a big neighbour. We always saw, and indeed in our dealings in Brussels, the UK was our senior partner, had very much similar views on quite a range of things. But Europe had literally like the USA as its senior partner. And effectively it's now saying, okay, you've got to move beyond that and take on that leadership role. So I think there's whole sets of relationships in Europe that will need to be built to allow that role to flourish in a way that's very positive. And I think the smaller countries like Ireland could have quite a lot of contribution in that context.
Great. Can I have a show of hands in the room? Anyone who wants a mic, or if most of our questions coming in on Slido? Okay, we have one down the back. If we can get, let's mix it up and take a question. So here in the room, and if I can just ask, give us your name and organisation and a question, not a speech, please, because we all want to go to lunch in about 7 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, Martin Murray, Asia Matters. My question for the panel is, as an open globalised economy, does Ireland's future competitiveness, we're talking 5-10 years plus, depend on trade with Asia, which now accounts for 40% of global GDP and 60% of global consumers? Thank you.
Question on Asia. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, I think, well, the questions focus on future competitiveness in many ways and diversity with markets. And I'll sound like a broken record here, but the biggest influence on our economy is going to be our national competitiveness. First and foremost, I mean, if we get that right, the opportunities will be endless, and organizations will see that, and we'll be able to be a springboard for companies to expand globally. So for me, we can't lose sight of getting that right first.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just very quickly, I mean, the investment in R&D is absolutely crucial. Innovation is crucial to future trade, so we must make sure we've got that very strong. I think one of the things that I've seen very positively over my career has been that the agencies now work very well together all around the world, and I think that's been really crucial. That wasn't the case historically. It was more the agencies were separate from the diplomats. That's changed over the last 20 years. I think that's particularly important in Asia, and I think it's particularly important to widen our links in Asia beyond China. I think that's a really important move. But I think what Paul just said is you really have to have competitiveness at home to make that work.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, we've one up the front. While we get a microphone to this gentleman here in the second row, I'll go back online for a moment. Jerry asks, the new US admin has been critical of renewables and frozen funding for climate initiatives. How will US companies respond regarding their own green targets globally? I'm looking at you, Paul. Anything in particular, or someone else wants to?
So the piece for me here is that we asked the question as well about how are we training people for sustainable roles in the future, is that companies are going to be constantly looking for where they can invest, where green credentials are being met. I mean, we heard earlier on the proliferation of data centers, the requirement for energy for data centers, but where absolutely possible, that's going to be green energy. And again, if I can bring it back home, we have such an opportunity in Ireland to develop our green energy, particularly wind energy and offshore, onshore or wind. We can be a leader in that. And it's not just about supporting the domestic economy with energy and being perhaps a net energy exporter. It's also about attracting industries of the future, or industries that require huge energy demands that we could never have thought of before. So for me, it actually comes back home. Again, we have to focus on the opportunities that we have here and how we're going to pursue that. We heard earlier on that, you know, the future is electric, and we have an abundance of opportunity to make it green and electric, and companies will continue to focus on that. It makes economic sense for them to want to do that, so it's not going to change.
Okay, great. Question here, thank you.
John McGrain from Ireland's Indigenous Family Businesses. One of the things, Thomas just spoke about not reducing ourselves to speaking in whispers. Are we kind of whispering past the trashing of agendas that have come to the fore in recent years, the DEI agenda, treatment of how China treats certain of its people, and other essentially social clauses that we might say, and where might we think that takes us?
Anyone want to brew on that for a moment, so I can come back to it? So, how Ireland takes a stand, human rights issues, DEI. I'll let you. Yeah, Francis, do you want?
All I would say, which is what I said earlier on, I think we need to hold with our values and know our values, but we need to engage in respectful dialogue in such a way that we don't actually become ineffective. Because if you aren't respectful at the first instance, the person isn't going to listen to you. So I think we need to manage those two together. It's the job of politicians, thank goodness, not academics like I've been for most of my life. But it is a very, very challenging. It is very challenging, and I every time I see people, as we did, I think on in the Oval Office when the Taoiseach was in there, I just sat at the edge of my seat till he was out again and safely the other side of the room. It's that notion of, because a wrong word is so difficult. We're pretty good with words in Ireland, but it's tricky.
Okay, I want to go to one last question, and it's an important one from Rory in the Irish Abroad unit, and that is, what role can our diaspora play in navigating our overseas relationships? Irish citizens abroad, diaspora. Orla, do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's communication and engagement, you know, as Paul said, a seat at the table and getting into the rooms and representing the companies. I think that's what's really important in these times.
Okay, great. Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, never underestimate the absolute strength of the social and cultural ties, and to lean on those. To give an anecdote of an example we had within the US when we were for St. Patrick's Week, I mean, time and again when we went into those meetings, the fondness spoken of Ireland was so palpable, and it's something that we can often dismiss and forget about, but it is a very powerful jumping point to get into the rooms and have those discussions.
Okay, this screen is about to turn red in 1 minute, so you have 20 seconds each to leave us with a final call to action, words of wisdom, something you want the audience to remember. Peter, go first, no pressure.
Yeah, so it's a difficult time, uncertain time, but also a time of opportunity.
Okay, great. Orla?
I would say tough times don't last forever, tough people do.
Love it. Francis?
Wow, after that, I'd say be positive and avoid, and above all, don't be complacent.
Okay, nice.
No words of wisdom, but definitely the Irish presidency of the EU is a huge opportunity for US-EU relationships that we can be right in the middle of.
Okay, great. Please give it up for Peter, Orla, Francis and Paul. We are exactly on time for lunch. So all that I ask that you do now is go enjoy networking. Lunch is going to take place outside. My huge thanks to the Taoiseach, to Minister Thomas Byrne, to all of our panellists and keynotes throughout the morning. Give them a final round of applause. And we will see you back here at 2:30 sharp, when we will be joined by Taoiseach Micheál Martin. So Taoiseach Micheál Martin taking the stage at 2:30. Do join us then. Thank you.